There are places where time seems to pool, where all the wasted years collect and the broken pieces of what once was lie scattered, waiting for hands brave enough to sift through them. High above Earth, beyond the thinning atmosphere where the blue fades to black, there is such a place. Some call it a junkyard, others call it the graveyard. It is a sprawling cloud of dead metal and abandoned dreams. Ships that once soared with purpose, satellites that once watched with unblinking eyes, and machines that once hummed with energy all now drift in silence. It's a place of endings, and yet it is where something new begins. In this field of wreckage, there is a small vessel, hidden among the forgotten. Its exterior is battered, the paint scraped and the hull scorched. It could be another derelict, except for the lights that glow within, not bright but steady, and the soft hum that vibrates against the dark. Inside, men and women work. They are neither celebrated heroes nor acknowledged experts. They are the remnants of a world that has been left behind. Earth is no longer the cradle it once was. To the wider galaxy, it is a relic, a backwater world clinging to the scraps of relevance. Other worlds have moved on, evolved beyond recognition, and left Earth to rust and rot. The galaxy's great powers see no value in Earth's junk, its old ships, or its failed dreams. But not everyone sees waste where others see nothing. In the small vessel hidden among the debris, there is a different vision at play. A man stands at the center of it all. He is not young, and his face bears the marks of time and regret. His eyes, though, are sharp, filled with a relentless focus. His name is forgotten by most who knew him. He has been many things: a soldier, a leader, a rebel, and now something else altogether. He looks around at the others in the cramped space: engineers hunched over consoles, philosophers scribbling furiously on walls, and old soldiers like him, looking for a cause to believe in. Here, the future is not written in the clear ink of certainty. It is scratched out from the rust and grime of a ruined past. He moves through the narrow aisles of the ship, touching the walls as if they are the ribs of a great beast. His footsteps are soft on the metal floor. The others nod as he passes, some with respect, others with wary eyes. They know him, know what he has lost and what he still hopes to find. There is no need for words here. They have been speaking for years, sharing the silence of those who know that words are often too small to hold what matters most. He reaches a panel, a small viewport that offers a glimpse of the junkyard outside. He stands there, looking out at the wreckage. There is a thought that sits heavy in his mind, a question that has followed him through every battle, every loss. What is worth saving from a world that is already broken? He has fought for Earth's glory before, fought until his bones ached and his soul cracked, and still, he has found himself standing here, among the debris. But perhaps that is where the answer lies: not in the pristine, not in the untouched, but in the things that others discard. He thinks of the old shipyards on Earth, where they would tear down ships that had outlived their use, strip them of their precious metals, melt them down, and turn them into something new. He thinks of the workers there, their hands black with grease and sweat, their backs bent from years of labor. They knew what it meant to make something from nothing, to salvage, to reclaim. There is a kind of poetry in it, a kind of defiance. That is what this place is, he realizes. It is a shipyard in the sky, a place where what is broken might be made whole again. He turns away from the viewport and walks to a console where a woman is bent over, her eyes fixed on the screen. She has a thin, severe face, and her hands move quickly, adjusting dials, tapping keys. She doesn't look up when he approaches. She doesn't need to. They have worked together long enough that words are unnecessary. He watches the screen as she works. It shows a blueprint, not of a new ship, but of an old one of the derelicts floating outside, gutted and useless. Or at least, that's what it appears to be. Can it be done? He asks, his voice steady, his eyes still on the screen. She stops, her fingers hovering over the keys. There is a pause, a long breath held between them. She has heard the question before, from others, from him. She has given answers that were lies, answers that were truths, but today she is tired of both. That depends, she says, her voice low, on what you're willing to lose to make it happen. He nods. It is the answer he expected. He has asked this question many times, and it is always the same. There are things you lose when you cling to the past, and there are things you lose when you let it go. The question is, which loss can you live with? Outside, among the wreckage, there is movement. Small drones flit between the hulks, welding, cutting, patching. They work with a strange grace, guided by unseen hands, turning junk into something more than it was. It is a slow process, and there are moments when it feels impossible. But bit by bit, piece by piece, something starts to take shape. An old freighter, its engines burned out and its hull cracked, begins to look like a ship again. Not a new ship, but a reborn one. The man watches this from his place at the console. He knows the odds. He knows that out there, beyond this junkyard, there are forces far stronger, far more advanced, and far more ruthless. They do not care for Earth or its forgotten people. They do not care for dreams built from scrap. They care for power, for order, for the status quo. But he has been to the clean places, the orderly places, and he has found no home there. His home is here, among the wreckage, among the broken and the discarded. He thinks back to his days as a soldier, to the battles he fought and the men he led. They were young then, young and foolish. They thought they could change the world with fire and steel. They learned, too late, that the world is not so easily changed. He thinks of the friends he lost, the promises he broke, the blood on his hands. He has tried to wash it away, but it is always there, a stain that does not fade. And yet, he is still here, still fighting, still trying to build something from the wreckage. Because what else is there? He has seen what happens when people stop trying. He has seen worlds collapse under the weight of their own apathy, seen people crumble when they give up on what they could be. And he will not let that happen, not here, not now. The woman beside him speaks again, her voice breaking the silence. You know, some of them think you're mad, she says. They think you're clinging to a world that's already gone. He turns to her, his eyes narrowing. Maybe I am, he says, but I'd rather be mad than be one of them. She looks at him for a moment, then nods, a small smile touching her lips. Maybe you're right, she says. Maybe madness is the only sane response to a world like this. He chuckles, a low, dry sound. Maybe. He looks back at the screen, at the blueprint of the old freighter, and his face grows serious again. But we're going to make this work. We have to. Because if we don't, there won't be anything left to save. She nods, and they stand there, side by side, watching as the drones continue their work, as the wreckage slowly begins to turn into something more. It is not a new beginning. It is not a clean slate. It is something messier, something harder. It is a second chance carved out of failure, a new path built from broken stones. And for him, that is enough. For now, it is enough. The silence inside the ship's narrow halls stretches on, filled with the steady hum of the machines and the low murmur of voices. The man and the woman stand shoulder to shoulder, watching the drones outside work on the old freighter, neither speaking, both lost in thoughts that twist like the tangled wreckage surrounding them. Their eyes reflect the dull light of the console, seeing something more in the dark metal hulls, in the broken shapes that drift slowly past. But even in this place of calm, there is movement. Change comes quietly, and it comes now. A signal pings across the board, a soft beep that breaks the quiet. The woman at the console straightens, her fingers flying over the keys. "We've got an incoming ship," she says, her tone sharp now, alert. "Unknown registry, not one of ours." The man's gaze flickers to the screen. His expression tightens, but he does not react in haste. He has seen too many things go wrong too quickly to move without thought. "Trajectory?" he asks, his voice calm. The woman taps a few keys, and a new set of coordinates appears on the display. Inbound from Sector 7. Direct approach. They're not hiding. "Bold," he mutters, "or foolish." She glances at him. "What do you want to do?" He pauses, considering. It could be a trap, a trick, a scouting party from one of the more opportunistic factions, waiting to see what this place is really worth. But something in the back of his mind tells him otherwise. He trusts that instinct more than he trusts most people. Let them come, he decides. But keep the turrets hot. I want to know if they flinch. Outside, the shape of a small, sleek vessel emerges from the debris field, navigating with a grace that speaks of someone who knows exactly where they're going. It moves through the graveyard with precision, avoiding the jagged edges of twisted metal and drifting wrecks with a familiarity that suggests more than a passing understanding of this place. It isn't long before the ship closes the distance, coming to a slow, controlled stop alongside the man's vessel. Looks like they're requesting to dock, the woman says. Let them, he replies, and meet me at the airlock. He moves through the cramped corridors, his mind already shifting gears, calculating the possibilities. He doesn't know who would be bold enough to come here without cover or caution, but he knows that whoever they are, they must believe they have something worth saying. Or selling. He doesn't have the luxury of refusing either. Not here. Not now. The airlock hisses as he reaches it, and the woman from the console appears beside him, carrying a small sidearm. She doesn't say anything, but she doesn't need to. She understands the risks, the game they're playing. He nods to her, then to the others who have gathered, weapons in hand, eyes sharp. They're ready. The outer door slides open, and a figure steps through. A woman, tall and lean, with a sharpness in her eyes that cuts through the dim light. She wears a simple suit, not military but functional, and her hair is pulled back, revealing a face lined with focus, not age. She carries no weapon, just a small case at her side, which she holds with a kind of confidence that suggests she doesn't need anything else. She surveys the room quickly, taking in the faces, the guns, the tension, and she smiles. Hello, she says. I'm here to talk. The man steps forward, his eyes narrowing. And who exactly are you? Someone who's got something you need, she replies, her smile unfazed by his tone. The name is Velasquez, Aria Velasquez. The room holds its breath for a moment. The man studies her, his mind working through a dozen scenarios, a dozen possible plays. And what makes you think we're interested? She glances around, taking in the worn faces, the patched uniforms, the way they all look to him for direction. Because you wouldn't be out here, scraping ships and ideas together from the bones of the past, if you didn't have an interest in something new, something that could change all this. She gestures around her, not dismissively, but with an understanding that catches him off guard. Change it how? He asks, still guarded. She sets the case down and opens it. Inside are schematics, blueprints, data drives filled with plans and designs. She pulls one out and holds it up. By turning this scrap heap into the most advanced fleet the galaxy has ever seen. He can't help but snort, a dry, humorless sound. You sound like you've been listening to too many stories. This junkyard's not about dreams. It's about survival. And survival, she counters, stepping closer, is built on the backs of those who dare to dream. He studies her, his expression unreadable. And what's the cost of your dream? She smiles again, but there's no amusement in it, only a hard edge. A choice. To stay here, picking through the bones, or to build something new, something that puts you back in the game. He glances at the schematics, then back at her. And why us? Why bring this here? Because I know what you're trying to do, she says. I know you've got the will. I know you've got the people. And I know that if there's any place in this galaxy that can turn junk into gold, it's this one. The room is quiet, the tension a living thing between them. He looks at her, seeing something in her eyes that he recognizes determination, perhaps, or madness. It's hard to tell the difference out here. He nods slowly. All right, Velasquez, show us what you've got. They move to the central chamber, a place filled with screens and maps, wires hanging from the ceiling, parts strewn across tables. She begins to lay out her plans, her voice quick, precise, her fingers dancing over the keys of a console as she brings up projections, models, and simulations. She talks about converting old engines into new forms of propulsion, about merging outdated alloys with modern composites to create something stronger, lighter, faster. Her words flow like a current, and soon, the room is caught in it. The man listens, arms crossed, his face set in a mask of skepticism. But he doesn't interrupt. He lets her speak, lets her build her case. When she's finished, he looks around the room. His people are watching her, and he can see the spark in their eyes. They're intrigued, inspired even, and that's dangerous. "So that's your pitch," he says finally. "A new fleet, built from old bones, and all you need is for us to take a leap of faith." She nods. "Exactly." He takes a deep breath. "And what do you get out of this?" Her eyes meet his, steady. "I get to see if I'm right. I get to see if this place can be more than just a graveyard." He regards her for a long moment. There is a part of him that wants to dismiss her, to turn her away and return to the safety of what he knows. But there is another part, a part that has grown tired of the endless cycles of loss and retreat, that wants to believe in something more. "Fine," he says at last. "We'll give it a shot. But make no mistake, Velasquez, I'm not interested in your dreams. I'm interested in results. You want to change the game? Prove it." She smiles, a real one this time, and it's not the smile of someone who's won. It's the smile of someone who's just gotten started. Deal. Over the next hours, the work begins. She brings in her team engineers, scientists, people whose minds hum with possibility. They set up in the corners of the cramped ship, pulling apart old engines, sketching out new designs, talking in low, urgent tones. The man watches, his doubts still circling like vultures, but there's something else now, too. A flicker of hope, buried deep, but not dead. He finds himself standing beside her later, both of them watching as the first parts are hauled into the makeshift workshop. "You're really convinced this is going to work," he says. She nods. "Convinced? No. But I'm willing to try. And that's more than most." He looks at her, and for the first time, he sees not just the idealist, not just the dreamer, but someone who is as desperate as he is. Desperate to find meaning in the ruins, to carve something new from the bones of what was. He nods, a small gesture, but it is enough. "We'll see," he says. "We'll see if this place still has some life left in it." And with that, they turn back to the work, side by side, but not yet together, both driven by their own reasons, both walking a thin line between what was and what could be. The ship hums around them, the sounds of construction echoing through its metal frame, and somewhere, in the wreckage outside, a spark catches fire. The work begins with the cold groan of metal against metal, the sound of machines spinning up to life, and the heavy scent of oil and burnt wires filling the cramped spaces of the ship. The people move like ants in a hive, each with a task, each with a purpose, and at the center of it all is the chosen ship, the first to be transformed, the Resolute. It sits there, anchored in the junkyard, its once proud form reduced to a hulk of twisted metal and faded memories. The name is barely legible along its hull, a ghost of its former self, a word that used to mean something more. Elias stands on a high platform overlooking the worksite, his arms crossed, his face as hard as the steel around him. He has been here before, seen efforts like this flare up like sparks in the dark, only to flicker out, leaving nothing but cold ash. But there is something different this time, something in the air that feels like more than just desperation. It's a current, a pull, like a magnet drawing them all toward a single point. And that point, he knows, is Velasquez. She moves among the workers, her presence unmistakable, her voice clear and direct as she coordinates, commands, and encourages. She is everywhere at once, at the consoles, by the schematics, on the hull itself, her hands working alongside the others. There's a fire in her, something that doesn't waver, and the people here are drawn to it like moths to a flame. The Resolute is no ordinary wreck. It was once a frigate, a mid-sized warship that saw more than its share of battles in the old wars. Its hull bears the scars of those days' blaster marks, deep gouges where enemy fire tore into its armor, patches where quick repairs were made in the heat of battle. Now it's a skeleton, stripped of anything useful long ago, floating aimlessly until it was dragged here. But for Velasquez, it is more than a husk. It is the foundation of something new. And as the team starts to work, the gravity of the task ahead begins to settle on everyone's shoulders. Elias watches as the drones buzz around the Resolute, their welding torches flaring bright in the darkness. Sparks shower down like falling stars as they cut away the rusted sections, exposing the bones beneath. He can see the engineers moving about, their tools clanging against the metal, their voices rising in short bursts of conversation, planning, recalibrating. It's a chaotic dance, but there is a rhythm to it, a kind of order born from chaos. He doesn't know why he agreed to this, why he let her convince him that this was worth the risk. Maybe it's the way she spoke, or maybe it's because he saw something in her eyes that he hadn't seen in a long time. Belief. Not just in the plan, but in something larger. In the people here, in their ability to take what was broken and turn it into something new. And now he watches as they work, and he wonders if maybe he was wrong. Maybe there's still something here worth believing in. He steps down from the platform and makes his way to the central work area. The air is thick with tension, every breath tasting of metal and dust. He moves past groups huddled over consoles, their screens flickering with streams of data. Velasquez is at the heart of it all, her hands deep in the guts of an old power conduit, surrounded by a small team of engineers. "How's it going?" he asks, his voice cutting through the noise. She looks up, her face smeared with grease, a slight smile on her lips. "Better than expected. The Resolute may look like a pile of scrap, but there's still good metal in there. We've managed to salvage more than I thought we would." He nods, glancing over at the schematic on the screen next to her. It shows a rough outline of the Resolute, overlaid with red and green markings. Most of it is red. "You think it'll hold together?" "It's not about whether it'll hold together," she replies, her tone even but firm. "It's about making it into something that can take a hit and still keep moving." He studies her for a moment, the way she carries herself, the way she speaks with a conviction that borders on stubbornness. "You've got a lot riding on this." "We all do," she says, not missing a beat. "But I've got faith in this team, and in this ship." Elias leans in, his eyes narrowing. Faith is a dangerous thing out here. It can blind you to the reality staring you in the face. "Maybe," she admits, her gaze steady. "But it can also push you to see things through when the odds aren't in your favor." He doesn't have a response to that, at least not one that wouldn't sound hollow. Instead, he turns his attention back to the Resolute. The drones are working on the exterior, reinforcing key sections of the hull with new plating salvaged from other wrecks. The engineers are inside, gutting the old systems and installing new ones, piecing together parts from a dozen different ships, a Frankenstein of metal and circuitry. The risks are enormous. Old tech doesn't always play nice with new. A single error in calibration could lead to catastrophic failures. Reactors could go critical, or propulsion systems could backfire, tearing the ship apart from the inside. Elias knows this better than most. He's seen ships ripped apart by mistakes, seen men and women pay the price for their hubris. Power conduits are patched, but they're still unstable, Velasquez says, drawing his attention back to her. "We're going to need to reroute the main line through the auxiliary cores to handle the new load. That means we're going to need more hands in engineering. It's not a one-person job." Elias nods. "I'll get some of the crew down there to help. But if it starts to go south, we pull the plug. I don't want this whole place going up because of one bad circuit." "Agreed," she says, wiping her hands on a rag. "But I don't plan on letting it come to that." Hours pass, and the work continues. The team splits into groups, each tackling a different part of the ship. The propulsion systems are overhauled, the old engines stripped down to their cores and rebuilt with parts from a half-dozen other wrecks. The reactor is patched and reinforced, every joint and seal checked and rechecked. The work is grueling, and the tension never lets up. Every clang of metal, every hiss of gas, every flicker of light is a potential disaster waiting to happen. Elias finds himself down in engineering, his hands dirty, his back aching. He's not an engineer by trade, but he knows his way around a power grid. He's there alongside the others, pulling cables, rerouting power, and monitoring the delicate balance of energy flowing through the conduits. He feels the sweat on his brow, the burn in his muscles, but he pushes through it, driven by something he can't quite name. Maybe it's just the need to see this through, to see if it's more than just another failed dream. There are moments when it seems like it's all going to fall apart. When a critical system overheats, when a patch doesn't hold, when a fuse blows and the lights flicker. But each time, Velasquez is there, calm and unyielding, her mind moving faster than the chaos around her. She issues orders with the authority of someone who has seen this all before, who knows exactly what needs to be done to keep it from spiraling out of control. And slowly, bit by bit, the Resolute begins to take shape. Not as it was, but as something new. Elias wipes his hands on his pants, his eyes scanning the reactor readings on the console. We're pushing the limits here. If this thing blows, it'll take half the Junkyard with it. Velasquez steps beside him, looking at the same readings. That's why we're taking it slow, one step at a time, but I believe this can work, and I think, deep down, you do too. He doesn't answer right away. He looks at her, really looks at her, and sees something in her that he hasn't seen in a long time. Not since before everything went to hell. Maybe it's hope, maybe it's madness, maybe it's both. Maybe, he says finally. But belief doesn't keep you alive out here. I've seen too many people die for things they believed in. And I've seen too many people give up because they stopped believing in anything, she counters. I'd rather be on this side of the line. He nods, not entirely agreeing, but not disagreeing either. He turns his attention back to the work. There's still a long way to go, and there's no guarantee any of this will work. But for now, they're moving forward, and that's enough. As the hours wear on, the Resolute begins to show signs of its new form. The clashing metal plates, the fused wiring, and the bolted-on circuitry all come together in a rough, almost ugly fashion. But there is a certain beauty in it, a kind of raw, functional elegance that speaks to the minds and hands shaping it. The work is methodical, yet chaotic. It is hard to tell where one ends and another begins. It's as if they're all caught up in a rhythm that only they can hear. Velasquez moves among the crew, her presence a constant stabilizing force. Every once in a while, she steps back to examine the progress, her eyes scanning every joint, every panel, every line of code running through the monitors. She doesn't just see the ship, she sees the potential it holds, the promise it could fulfill. And she knows they're getting closer, but they're not there yet. Elias is in the main control room, where the ship's primary systems are being wired together. His hands move across the controls with the familiarity of someone who's done this 1,000 times. He taps a series of commands, watching as the screens flicker and the systems begin to align. The main power grid comes online with a low hum, the lights flickering to life in the darkened corridors. The sound of it sends a ripple through the team, an acknowledgement that they're taking the next step, one that could either make or break the whole effort. Velasquez steps up beside him, nodding toward the screens. How's it looking? Power grid stable for now, he replies. But we're going to need to run a full diagnostic to make sure we don't have any leaks or faulty connections. One slip up, and we'll be dealing with a fireball. She nods, understanding the gravity. I've got the team running checks on all the primary lines. We need to make sure everything is synchronized before we try to activate the core systems. Elias leans back, his eyes never leaving the screens. We're walking a tightrope here. You've done good work, but we're still a long way from calling this a success. Success isn't the point, she says, her voice quiet but firm. It's about pushing boundaries, seeing what we're capable of when we're not bound by the rules everyone else has set for us. He glances at her, a hint of something like admiration in his eyes. You talk like someone who's not afraid of failure. I'm not afraid of trying, she replies. There's a difference. The tension in the room is thick as they begin the process of rerouting the main power lines through the auxiliary cores. This is the most delicate part of the operation, where even a slight miscalculation could result in catastrophic failure. The team works with a quiet intensity, every movement measured, every decision calculated. Velasquez directs the engineers as they strip away old wiring and replace it with new, stronger lines capable of handling the increased power load. Elias keeps his eyes on the diagnostic screens, watching for any signs of instability. The moments stretch, each second feeling like a minute. The ship's reactor hums in the background, its power output slowly climbing as the systems come online. There's a feeling in the room that's almost electric, a mix of anticipation, fear, and something else. Hope, maybe? The idea that this could actually work, that they might pull off the impossible. Core systems are ready for synchronization, one of the engineers calls out from the far end of the room. We're green across the board. Velasquez nods. Initiate sequence on my mark. Elias watches her closely, his hands hovering over the controls. There's no turning back now. Are you sure about this? Never more sure of anything, she replies. All right, then. Let's see what this thing can do. She gives the signal, and the engineer begins the sequence. The room is suddenly filled with a low rumble as the reactor core stabilizes, its energy coursing through the newly laid conduits. The lights flicker for a moment, and then hold steady. The hum grows louder, deeper, and the entire ship seems to shiver as the power flows through it, waking it up from a long, forced sleep. There's a moment of stillness as everyone waits, holding their breath. Then, one by one, the screens light up with green indicators. Systems online. No critical errors. The ship's diagnostic displays flood with data, but there's no sign of a catastrophic failure. The power is holding. The Resolute is alive. A cheer goes up from the crew, a mixture of relief and triumph. Velasquez allows herself a small smile, but her focus remains sharp. We've cleared the first hurdle, but we're not out of the woods yet. Begin Phase 2. We need to test the propulsion and navigation systems. Make sure everything's in sync before we even think about a test flight. Elias looks over at her, unable to suppress a grin. Not bad for a bunch of renegades. Don't start celebrating yet, she says. We're only halfway there. He chuckles, but there's a weight that's lifted off his shoulders, a tension that he hadn't realized he was carrying. Maybe, just maybe, this crazy idea isn't so crazy after all. He moves over to the propulsion control panel, running a series of checks as the engineers feed power to the engines. The Resolute begins to vibrate as the massive thrusters come to life, a deep rumble building in the ship's bones. Engine readings are coming in steady, an engineer reports. No fluctuations in power levels. Keep it steady, Velasquez orders. Ease it up to 50% output and hold. The ship vibrates more intensely as the power levels climb, the hum of the engines becoming a roar. Elias watches the readings closely, his fingers dancing over the controls. The numbers look good, almost too good. He can feel the adrenaline starting to spike in his veins. They're on the knife's edge now, and one wrong move could send them spiraling. 50% and holding, the engineer calls out. Systems are stable. Good, Velasquez says. Now, let's test maneuvering thrusters. I want to make sure this thing can actually move. Elias nods and adjusts the controls, activating the maneuvering thrusters. The ship responds with a lurch, shifting slightly to one side. It's a small movement, but it feels enormous, like the first step of something ancient that's been asleep for far too long. He makes a series of adjustments, and the Resolute moves again, more smoothly this time, its bulk gliding through the junkyard. The cheers from the crew grow louder, but Velasquez remains focused. Let's not get cocky. Run the diagnostics again. I want to make sure everything's still in the green. Elias pulls up the diagnostic screens, watching as the data streams in. All systems are nominal, he says. Looks like we're in the clear. She lets out a breath she didn't realize she was holding. All right, let's bring it back to idle and shut down the engines for now. We need to go over everything one more time before we consider a test flight. Elias nods, his hands moving across the controls as he powers down the engines. The ship's hum fades into silence, but the feeling of accomplishment lingers in the air. They did it. Against all odds, they've managed to bring this old wreck back to life. It's not perfect, and there's still a lot of work to be done, but it's a start. A real start. As the crew begins to disperse, Velasquez turns to Elias. You know, there was a moment back there when I thought we might actually pull this off. He looks at her, his expression softened by a mixture of exhaustion and something else respect. Maybe. I think we just did. She smiles, a real, genuine smile, and for a moment, they're not just two people on a junkyard ship, surrounded by the broken remnants of a forgotten world. There's something more, a spark in the dark, a chance at something new. Yeah, she says quietly, maybe we did. But the smile fades as she turns her gaze back to the Resolute. They stand there, side by side, looking out at the ship that's more than just a ship. It's a beginning, and beginnings are always the hardest part. But it's something, and for now, that's enough. The Resolute no longer a rusted, forgotten hulk, but something more glides out of the junkyard and into open space. Sleek armor plating and bristling weapons arrays mark the transformation. The ship that once represented decay now feels like a weapon forged in the fires of desperation and hope. Inside, the crew prepares for their first real test. This isn't just a technical exercise, it's a gamble on their future. Elias knows the stakes. So does Velasquez. If this goes wrong, it isn't just the Resolute that will burn, it's everything they've worked for, every fragile scrap of faith and ambition. Elias stands by the central console, his eyes moving across the screens as if searching for something buried in the code. His jaw is tight, his stance steady. He's prepared for this, but preparation is a poor shield against the unknown. Velasquez moves to his side, her face calm but focused. Pirates are on the scanner, she says. They've been picking off ships near the debris field for weeks now. If we're going to make a statement, now's the time. Elias nods. He knows the plan, knows the risks. These pirates have grown bolder, feeding off the chaos of Earth's weakened state, attacking trade routes and civilian vessels without fear of consequence. What's our approach? He asks, his tone flat. We move in fast, hit them hard. They're not expecting resistance here, Velasquez replies. She's watching the screens, watching him. We're in uncharted territory. We've got to show them what we're made of. All right, let's make it count, Elias says, his voice steady. All stations, prepare for combat operations. The crew jumps into action, flipping switches, entering commands, their movements smooth and precise. The hum of the engines deepens, the power levels rising as the ship's systems sync up for battle. For a moment, there's a collective breath held in anticipation, and then they are moving fast and silent, a predator in a graveyard of forgotten things. The Resolute accelerates, cutting through the void with a newfound grace, and the pirate ships come into view. Ragtag vessels, barely held together by scraps and patches, armed to the teeth with salvaged weaponry. They are the vultures of space, circling the carcass of a dying world, and Elias feels a cold fury building in his chest as he sees them. They're turning, one of the crew members reports. They've spotted us. Good, Elias mutters. Let them. Velasquez locks eyes with him. Weapon systems are green. We're ready. Open a channel, Elias orders. The comms officer nods and the line opens, a crackling hiss filling the control room for a moment before Elias speaks. Pirate vessels, this is the Resolute. You are to cease your operations and leave this sector immediately, or you will be fired upon. This is your only warning. Silence follows, broken only by the hum of the ship and the distant creaks of settling metal. Then a voice comes through, rough and mocking. Who the hell are you? This is our turf now. We don't answer to Earth's scraps. Elias glances at Velasquez. She raises an eyebrow, but there's a gleam in her eye. They both know this is exactly what they expected. Cut the channel, Elias says. Target the lead ship. The order is followed with swift precision. A deep rumble courses through the ship as the main guns charge, and then the Resolute fires. The beam lances out, cutting through the darkness, and the lead pirate ship erupts in a ball of flame and debris. The comms light up again with panic chatter, and the remaining ships scatter like rats in a flood. Direct hit, Velasquez notes, her voice steady. 2 ships breaking formation, trying to flank us. Bring us around. Keep them in our sights, Elias commands. I want them to know we're not here to play. The Resolute moves with surprising agility, turning on its axis and accelerating toward the remaining ships. It's a dance of metal and energy, the ship responding almost intuitively to the commands of its crew. The pirates are outclassed, outmaneuvered, but they're desperate. They've got nothing to lose, and that makes them dangerous. 2 incoming bogeys. High left, one of the gunners shouts. Elias and Velasquez both see it 2 smaller, faster ships banking hard and diving in, guns blazing. The ship rocks as the impacts hit, shields flaring under the strain. The hull groans but holds. Elias grips the console. Return fire. The guns speak again, and one of the pirate ships disintegrates in a flash of white-hot plasma. The other swerves, trying to escape, but it's too slow. The Resolute cuts through space with a deadly precision, its beams tearing into the target. The pirate ship splits apart, a lifeless husk tumbling away into the darkness. Silence settles in the control room, broken only by the distant sounds of systems recalibrating. The threat is over, for now. But as the adrenaline fades, a different tension takes its place. Velasquez turns to Elias. There's one left. They're trying to get away. Elias watches the last ship on the scanner, a damaged wreck limping away from the battlefield. Let them go, he says, but his voice is uncertain. Velasquez's eyes narrow. And what happens when they come back with friends, or when they start hitting civilian convoys again? You think they'll show mercy just because we let them live? There it is, the line between them, drawn clearly for the first time. Elias considers her words, the weight of them heavy on his shoulders. He knows she's right, in a way. Mercy in this world is a luxury, and luxuries have a cost. They know what we can do now, he argues. Maybe that'll be enough. Or maybe it won't, Velasquez replies, her tone sharp. We didn't come out here to make half measures. The room is silent again, the crew watching, waiting. It's a moment that stretches, a choice that hangs in the air like a blade. Elias stares at the retreating ship, his mind churning. He can almost see the faces of the crew on that vessel, desperate and afraid. He's been in their position before, more times than he cares to remember. There's a fine line between justice and revenge, and he's not sure where this falls. Velasquez steps closer, her voice low but insistent. You said it yourself. We're not here to play. Elias feels the weight of her words pressing against his chest, but something in him resists. We can't just become what we're fighting against, he says, more to himself than to her. That's not what this is, she replies. This is about survival, ours and theirs. He looks at her, seeing the fire in her eyes, the conviction. He wants to believe there's another way, but maybe she's right. Maybe they don't have the luxury of mercy. Maybe this is what it means to be out here, at the edge of everything. Fine, he says, his voice barely above a whisper. Target the engines. Disable them. Velasquez nods, and the order is given. The Resolute fires again, but this time it's a precise strike. The pirate ship shudders and goes dark, its engines dead. It drifts, powerless, in the vast emptiness of space. Send a message, Elias says quietly. Tell them they've got one chance to leave this sector and never come back. Next time, there won't be any warnings. The comms officer nods and transmits the message. Velasquez doesn't say anything, but there's a tension in her stance. She's not satisfied, but she understands. For now, it's enough. Elias watches the drifting ship, his thoughts heavy. The battle is over, but the questions remain, gnawing at the edges of his mind. What kind of future are they building here? What kind of leaders will they become? The Resolute has proven its strength, but strength alone isn't enough. Not for what's coming. He turns to Velasquez, and there's a moment of understanding between them, a truce of sorts. They both know this is only the beginning. The choices will get harder, the stakes higher. But for now, they have their first victory. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough to keep moving forward. The stillness in the control room feels heavier than the battle's intensity. The air is thick with the unspoken thoughts of everyone on board. The Resolute hums with energy as systems cool down and recalibrate. The defeated pirate ship drifts lifelessly on the monitor, a stark reminder of the choices made today. Elias looks around at his crew, their faces a mix of relief and uncertainty. They've tasted their first real conflict in this newly forged vessel, and with it, a sense of both accomplishment and unease. Some are exhilarated, their adrenaline still pumping. Others are more subdued, weighing the moral costs of what just transpired. Velasquez breaks the silence. "I need a damage report," she calls out, her voice cutting through the thick air. She's still standing close to Elias, her posture tense but controlled. "Minor hull damage on the port side," one of the engineers replies. "Shields absorbed most of the hits. We'll need a few hours to patch up, but we're operational." Elias nods. "Good work, everyone. Stay sharp. We're not done yet." There's a murmur of acknowledgement, but it's clear that the battle has raised more questions than it answered. The crew disperses to their stations, some still casting glances at Elias and Velasquez, sensing the tension between their leaders. Elias moves toward the observation deck, needing a moment away from the bridge's controlled chaos. Velasquez follows, catching up with him just as he reaches the wide viewport overlooking the vast expanse of space. The remnants of the pirate ships drift among the stars, a silent testament to the raw power they now wield. "Was that a victory?" she asks, leaning against the frame beside him. "Because it didn't feel like one." Elias doesn't turn to face her. His eyes are fixed on the void, but his mind is elsewhere. "We proved a point," he says after a moment. "That's something." "But what point?" Velasquez presses. "That we're willing to fight? That we're willing to kill? Or that we're still afraid to commit?" Elias sighs, finally turning to meet her gaze. "What do you want from me, Velasquez? Blood? A slaughter? These people are just as desperate as we are, maybe more." "They chose this life," she responds sharply. "They chose to prey on the weak. We're supposed to be different." "Are we?" Elias counters, his voice rising just enough to draw the attention of a few passing crew members. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like we're just drawing the same lines, playing the same games. We're just better armed now." Velasquez narrows her eyes, but there's no anger there, only determination. "And that's why we need to lead. Because if we don't, someone else will. Someone who won't hesitate to destroy everything we've built the moment it suits them." Elias looks at her for a long moment, then turns back to the viewport. He knows she's right, at least in part. But he also knows there's a cost to that kind of thinking, a price that can't be measured in ships or lives alone. "Maybe it's not about who's right," he says quietly. "Maybe it's about what's left when the smoke clears." Velasquez doesn't reply immediately. She's not one to dwell on philosophical musings when there are practical matters to attend to. "We'll need to have a talk with the crew," she says finally. "Get them on the same page. There's already too much doubt floating around." Elias nods, but he's not sure how much talking will help. He knows some of the crew have started to question his decisions and his hesitations. They want a clear leader, someone who won't waver in the face of hard choices, and he can't blame them for that. But he also knows that leadership isn't just about being decisive. It's about knowing when to hold back and when to weigh the cost. He turns to leave, but before he does, he looks back at Velasquez. "We're in this together, remember that. We have to be." She nods, her expression softening just a bit. "I'm with you, Elias. Just don't make me regret it." Back on the bridge, the crew is still busy assessing the aftermath. But amidst the flurry of activity, there's a subtle shift in the air. A few crew members are gathered near the comm station, speaking in hushed tones. Elias notices this as he steps back into the room. He's always been good at reading the mood of a room, and right now, that mood feels like a powder keg. One of the younger officers, a man named Kieran, seems particularly agitated. Elias catches bits of his conversation with the other's words like hesitation, uncertainty, risk. It's clear he's not happy with how the encounter was handled. Kieran has always been one of the more vocal members of the crew, a former fighter pilot with a penchant for bold actions and a disdain for indecision. "Something on your mind, Kieran?" Elias asks as he approaches, his tone measured but firm. Kieran straightens up, clearly not expecting to be called out so directly. "Just discussing strategy, sir," he replies, though there's a hard edge to his voice. "Some of us think we could have handled that differently." "Differently how?" Elias asks, his gaze steady. "Well, we had them on the ropes. Could have finished the job, sent a clearer message," Kieran says, his eyes locking with Elias's, challenging. "And what message would that have been?" Elias presses. "That we're no different from them, that we're willing to kill without need." Kieran's jaw tightens. "With all due respect, sir, this isn't a game of morals. It's survival. You give an enemy a chance to regroup, they come back stronger. We've all seen it." Elias can feel the room's attention shifting to this exchange. This is a moment that needs to be handled carefully. "You're not wrong, Kieran," he says evenly. "But survival isn't just about who's got the bigger guns. It's about who can build something worth surviving for. We're not here to become what we're fighting against. We're here to prove there's another way." Kieran holds his gaze for a moment, then nods, though it's clear he's not entirely convinced. Elias can't afford to lose him or any of the crew to doubt or dissent. This ship, this mission, needs unity more than anything else. Velasquez steps in, sensing the tension. "We've all got our views on how to do this," she says. "But let's not forget why we're here. We're not a fleet of marauders or mercenaries. We're here to protect, to rebuild. That means making hard choices and living with them." Kieran gives a small nod, and the others seem to relax a bit, the tension easing. Elias knows it's not the end of the discussion, but it's enough for now. They have a mission to complete, and he needs every one of them focused and committed. "All right," Elias says, his voice carrying authority. "Let's get back to work. We've got a long road ahead, and I need all of you on it." The crew disperses, and Elias takes a deep breath, feeling the weight of command settle a little heavier on his shoulders. This was just one battle, small in the grand scheme of things, but it set the tone for what's to come. Every decision will be scrutinized and every action weighed, and that's how it should be. Velasquez moves to stand beside him again. "You handled that well," she says. "They need to hear it from you." Elias nods. "I know, and they will, but we've got to keep moving. There's no room for doubt." "Agreed," Velasquez replies. She looks at him, her expression serious but not unkind. "But remember, they're not the only ones looking to you for answers." He meets her gaze, and for a moment, there's an understanding between them, an acknowledgement of the path they're on, the uncertainty that lies ahead. They've committed to this fight, this mission, and now they must see it through, come what may. Elias looks out at the stars, the distant pinpricks of light that seem to whisper both promise and peril. The battle may be over, but the war for Earth, for what it could become, is just beginning. The newly transformed Resolute cuts through the dark of space, its sleek hull gliding smoothly in the wake of its first battle. The debris of the skirmish has long since faded into the vastness of the cosmos, but the echo of decisions made still resonates within the ship's metallic bones. For Elias and his crew, it is a moment of reckoning. For Aria Velasquez, it is an invitation to think deeper about the path they are forging. She knows this path will need more than ships and weapons. It will need ideas, principles, and a philosophy to guide them. And that's why they're here. Ahead of them lies an unassuming asteroid, one of thousands scattered across this section of the belt. At first glance, it appears like any other chunk of rock, pockmarked and scarred by millennia of cosmic collisions. But as the Resolute draws closer, subtle signs of artificiality become clear, antennae bristling from craggy surfaces, hidden thrusters embedded within, and faint electromagnetic pulses detectable only by those who know where to look. This is Asimov's station, the hidden enclave of the Thinkers Guild. Elias stands at the bridge, surveying the rock through the forward viewport. His eyes narrow as he watches the asteroid grow larger, the disguised fortress slowly coming into focus. "This is what you've been waiting for," he says, turning to Aria, who stands beside him. Her face is calm, but her eyes are alive with anticipation. "Yes," she replies, "the thinkers can help us. They can give us more than just machines, they can give us a framework for using them wisely." Elias grunts, his skepticism plain. "And they'll listen to us? Help us? Just like that?" "They value reason above all else," Aria says. "If our reasoning is sound, they'll listen." Elias isn't convinced, but he nods. "Then let's hope your philosophers are in a listening mood today." As they approach the station, the ship's comms crackle to life. "Incoming vessel, identify yourself," a voice demands, neutral yet authoritative. "This is the Resolute," Elias replies. "We're here to speak with the Thinkers Guild. We have Aria Velasquez on board." A pause follows, filled with static. Then, the voice returns, softer but with a hint of respect. "You are clear to dock, Resolute. Proceed to docking Bay 7. Welcome, Velasquez." As the docking sequence begins, Aria feels a surge of both relief and tension. The Thinkers Guild is not a monolithic entity. It's a congregation of some of the sharpest minds from Earth and beyond, philosophers, mathematicians, AI ethicists, each with their own agendas and convictions. They are the steel and code behind the ideas that fuel civilizations, and today she must convince them to fuel hers. The docking bay is dimly lit, with an almost ascetic atmosphere. Cold, sterile metal meets the eye at every turn, and the sound of boots on metal echoes hauntingly, underscoring the profound silence that permeates the station. Elias and Aria step off the gangway, flanked by a small contingent of crew members. They are met by a tall, thin man with graying hair and a posture that suggests both humility and a deep, unyielding confidence. "Aria Velasquez," he says, nodding slightly. "It has been some time. I am Oren, current convener of the guild." Aria nods in return, though her posture is far less humble. "Oren, thank you for receiving us." "Come," Oren says, gesturing down a narrow corridor. "The council is eager to hear your proposal." The group walks in silence, the corridor twisting and turning, branching off into countless passageways and chambers. Aria takes note of the subtle inscriptions on the walls, mathematical equations, philosophical maxims, and fragments of ancient texts. Each turn seems to plunge them deeper into the station, as if the structure itself were a labyrinth designed to test not just one's sense of direction, but one's resolve to reach the heart of the matter. They finally arrive at a circular chamber. The room is large, with a domed ceiling that creates an eerie acoustic effect. Every sound is amplified. Every whisper becomes a shout. Around the room sit a dozen or so figures, each at a simple metal desk, with a small light illuminating their face. There are no titles or identifiers, just the thinkers. Oren steps into the center. "This is Aria Velasquez, who once walked among us," he announces. "She has brought a proposition. Let us hear it." Aria steps forward, feeling the weight of a dozen intense gazes upon her. She stood before many audiences, but none quite like this. The thinkers are not swayed by emotion or rhetoric. They demand substance. She knows that every word she speaks will be dissected, every argument challenged. "We stand at a crossroads," she begins, her voice steady but passionate. "Earth has become a wasteland in the eyes of the galaxy. We have been exploited, ignored, and discarded. But in our discarded state, we have discovered something new: potential. The transformation of the Resolute is just the beginning. With the right guidance, we can reshape the future. Not just for ourselves, but for all who have been cast aside." One of the thinkers, a woman with sharp eyes and a silver streak in her hair, speaks up. "And what is it you seek from us, Velasquez? Weapons? Strategy?" "No," Aria replies, her gaze unwavering. "We seek philosophy. We seek a moral compass for this journey. We need to know how to wield this power without losing ourselves to it." A murmur ripples through the chamber. This is not the typical request they receive. Oren raises a hand to silence the room. "You speak of philosophy, yet you bring with you a weapon of war," he says, his voice calm but piercing. "What is your true intention?" Aria takes a breath, preparing herself for the first of many challenges. The Resolute is a means, not an end. It represents our capability to protect, to defend. But defense without purpose is just another form of aggression. We want to build something that lasts, something that matters. Do you believe in the purity of your cause? A different voice interjects, a younger man, his face half hidden in shadow. How do you know that once you start down this path, you won't become the very thing you claim to fight against? I don't know, Aria admits, her honesty cutting through the room like a blade. But I'm willing to risk everything to find out, and I want your guidance in that endeavor. Help us navigate this uncertainty. Help us keep our humanity intact. Another murmur, this time more thoughtful. The thinkers are intrigued, but not yet convinced. A third member, an older woman with a deep, resonant voice, speaks. You come seeking clarity, Velasquez, yet clarity itself can be a form of blindness. To define a moral compass is to constrain it. Would you have us bind your hands as well? Aria nods. I understand the paradox, but without a compass, we drift, and if we drift, we become lost. We need something to strive toward, even if it's imperfect. Elias, who has remained silent until now, finally steps forward. I don't know much about philosophy, he says bluntly, his rough voice a stark contrast to the refined tones of the thinkers. But I do know this out there, in the black, ideals don't last long without action, and actions need principles behind them, or they turn to ashes. Velasquez has a point. We need more than just metal and fire. The room falls silent again. The thinkers confer among themselves in low tones, their words a soft susurration against the metal walls. After a few moments, Oren raises his hand once more, and the voice is quiet. We will deliberate, he says. This is not a decision we can make lightly. We see value in what you propose, Velasquez, but there are risks that could affect more than just you and your crew. Aria nods. I understand, and I'm prepared to answer any questions you have. Oren gives a slight nod. Very well. We will reconvene in 1 hour. The room they're led to is sparse, just a few chairs, a small table, and a viewport that shows the distant stars. Elias takes a seat, leaning back, his eyes closed as if in thought. Aria stands near the viewport, her arms crossed. She's been in this station before, but it feels different now, more urgent, more consequential. You handled yourself well in there, Elias says, eyes still closed. It's not over yet, Aria replies, her tone somber. The thinkers don't make decisions quickly. They weigh every possibility, every consequence. Sounds like they'd get along with you. Aria stood by the viewport, her gaze fixed on the stars, but her mind was far from the distant points of light. The words exchanged in the council chamber echoed in her thoughts, mingling with doubts she had long suppressed. The thinkers had challenged her in ways she had expected, but something was unsettling about the way they spoke, as if every question they asked had 100 more hidden beneath it. She glanced at Elias, who was still reclining in his chair, seemingly at ease. But she knew him well enough to recognize the tension in his shoulders, the subtle furrow in his brow. He was thinking, turning over their encounter with the thinkers in his mind, just as she was. They had been through much together, but this seeking the approval and guidance of minds like those in the Thinkers Guild was new territory for both of them. They're going to push us, you know, Aria said quietly, breaking the silence. They're going to question everything we do, everything we plan to do. Elias opened his eyes, regarding her with a steady, measured look. And they should. If we're serious about this, about changing things, we can't afford to go in blind. Aria nodded, though a part of her felt the weight of Elias's words pressing down on her. She had always been a believer in the power of ideas, and in the importance of questioning and challenging the status quo. But now, faced with the reality of it, she wondered how much they could endure. How much questioning and challenging could they withstand before it all began to unravel? What's really on your mind? Elias asked, his voice gentler now, sensing the conflict within her. Aria hesitated, struggling to find the right words. I've always believed in what we're doing, Elias. But standing there, in front of them, I couldn't help but feel, exposed, vulnerable, like everything we've built could be torn apart by a single argument, a single flaw in our reasoning. Elias leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, his gaze never leaving her. That's the point, isn't it? To test ourselves, to make sure we're not just building on sand. But what if we are? Aria's voice was almost a whisper. What if everything we're doing is just a house of cards? One wrong move and it all comes crashing down. Elias was silent for a moment, considering her words. Then he stood up, crossing the room to stand beside her at the viewport. Together, they looked out into the void, the stars seeming both impossibly distant and unnervingly close. "Look out there," Elias said, his voice steady. "What do you see?" Aria frowned slightly, not sure where he was going with this. "Stars. Endless space." "Exactly," Elias said. "It's vast. Overwhelming. It can make you feel small and insignificant. But you know what I see? I see an opportunity. I see the chance to carve out something meaningful in all that emptiness." Aria turned to look at him, seeing the determination in his eyes, the unshakable belief that had always driven him forward, no matter the odds. "And that's what we're doing, Aria. We're carving out something meaningful. It's not about perfection, or about having all the answers. It's about the will to keep pushing forward, to keep trying, even when everything seems impossible." His words resonated with her, grounding her in a way she hadn't expected. Elias had always been a man of action, of pragmatism. But there was a depth to him, a philosophy of his own that she hadn't fully appreciated until now. I want to make sure we're doing the right thing," Aria said softly. Elias smiled, a rare expression for him, and one that held a surprising warmth. "We'll never know for sure, Aria. That's the truth. But we'll keep asking the questions. We'll keep challenging ourselves, just like the thinkers are doing. And as long as we do that, we're on the right path." She nodded, feeling a sense of calm settle over her. The doubts were still there, but they no longer felt insurmountable. They were part of the process, part of the journey, and she wasn't alone in facing them. Before she could respond, the door to the waiting chamber slid open, and Oren stepped inside. His expression was unreadable, as always, but there was a certain gravity to his presence that made both Aria and Elias turn toward him. "The council has reached a decision," Oren said, his voice echoing slightly in the small room. "We have weighed your proposal, considered your arguments, and debated the potential consequences." Aria felt her heart rate quicken, but she forced herself to remain calm, to focus on Oren's words. "We recognize the potential of what you are trying to achieve," Oren continued. "But we also recognize the dangers inherent in your path. The use of force and the transformation of technology for military purposes are not decisions to be made lightly. However, we also see that you are committed to seeking guidance, to ensuring that your actions are grounded in something more than mere survival." He paused, letting his words sink in before he delivered his verdict. "The Thinkers Guild will support your endeavor, on the condition that you continue to seek our counsel. We will provide you with the philosophical framework you seek, but we will also hold you accountable. If at any point we feel that your actions are straying from the principles we established together, we will withdraw our support." Aria exhaled slowly, feeling a mix of relief and apprehension. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was more than she had hoped for. They had the backing of the guild, and with it, a moral compass to guide them. "We accept your terms," Aria said, her voice firm. Oren nodded, a faint smile touching his lips. "Then let us begin. There is much to discuss." The following days were a whirlwind of discussions, debates, and intense philosophical inquiry. The Thinkers Guild proved to be everything Aria had expected and more. Each member brought their own unique perspective, challenging her and Elias in ways they had never experienced before. They debated the ethics of warfare, the responsibility of power, and the potential consequences of their actions. The discussions were rigorous, often leaving Aria mentally and emotionally exhausted. But they were also invigorating, forcing her to refine her ideas, to consider angles she had never before explored. Elias, for his part, remained a steady presence at her side. Though philosophy was not his natural arena, he participated in the debates with a pragmatism that often served as a counterbalance to the more abstract ideas being discussed. His insights were valued, and more than once, he found himself engaging in spirited exchanges with some of the guild's more seasoned members. One particular debate stood out: a discussion on the morality of using their newly transformed ships as weapons. Aria argued passionately for the necessity of defense, while a thinker named Celeste challenged her, questioning whether the line between defense and aggression could ever truly be maintained. "Once you've created a weapon," Celeste said, her voice calm but firm, "it exists to be used. You may tell yourself that it's for defense, but in the heat of conflict, can you be sure that it won't become something more, something darker?" Aria struggled with the question, knowing that Celeste's point was valid. But Elias stepped in, his voice cutting through the tension. "A weapon is a tool," he said. "It's the intent behind it that matters. We're not out here to conquer, to dominate. We're here to protect, to ensure that Earth and others like it aren't trampled underfoot by those with more power. If we can't hold to that, then yes, we risk becoming what we hate. But that's why we're here, talking to you to make sure that doesn't happen." The room fell silent, the weight of Elias's words settling over them. Celeste nodded slowly, acknowledging his point. "Intent is crucial," she conceded, "but intent can change. That is what we must guard against." The debate continued, but Elias's words lingered in the air, a reminder of the fine line they were walking. It was a line they would have to tread carefully, with the thinker's guidance and their own resolve. When the time came to leave Asimov Station, both Aria and Elias felt a renewed sense of purpose. The thinkers had given them more than just philosophical guidance, they had given them a sense of clarity, a stronger foundation on which to build their mission. As they prepared to depart, Oren approached them once more, his expression thoughtful. "Remember," he said, "this is just the beginning. Philosophy is not a static thing. It evolves, just as we do. Your journey will shape your beliefs, just as your beliefs will shape your journey. Stay true to your principles, but remain open to growth." Aria nodded, feeling the weight of his words. "We will." Elias, ever the pragmatist, simply extended his hand. "Thanks, Oren. We won't forget what you've done for us." Oren shook his hand, a rare smile crossing his face. "Safe travels, Resolute. The stars are vast, but your path is yours to forge." As the Resolute disengaged from the station and set course back to their base, Aria allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. They had come seeking answers, and they had found more than they had anticipated. But with those answers came new questions and new challenges. The path ahead was uncertain, but it was a path they would walk with eyes wide open, guided by both steel and code and by the principles they were still defining. The silence in the command deck of the Resolute was unnatural, almost suffocating. Outside, stars stretched into eternity, cold and indifferent, while inside, a storm of tension brewed. The crew waited, their breath shallow, their eyes fixed on the main display screen. A dense cluster of crimson signals blinked there, each one representing a ship from the alien fleet that had materialized on the edges of their solar system. The silencers, no one had heard of them before, but their appearance had been swift, like predators sensing prey. Aria leaned over the console, her fingers flying across the interface as she analyzed the data. "These ships, they're unlike anything I've seen," she murmured, her voice barely audible in the stillness. Their sleek forms and dark, almost obsidian surfaces made them appear as shadows against the cosmos. Each one seemed to pulse with an energy that was foreign, unsettling, and disturbingly precise. "It's as if they're built to absorb light, to be invisible until they choose not to be." Elias stood beside her, his posture rigid, his face a mask of focus. "Why now?" he asked. "Why show up just as we're making progress? Someone doesn't want us to succeed." "They're called the silencers for a reason," Oren interjected from the side, his normally calm demeanor replaced by a grim seriousness. "Their modus operandi is suppression. They believe certain civilizations should remain dormant. never rising to challenge or disrupt what they consider to be a stable order. A ripple of unease spread through the crew members present, each one grasping the implications of Oren's words. To the silencers, Earth was a threat and unstable element in a carefully balanced equation. "Do we know their strength?" Elias asked, eyes narrowing as he studied the cluster on the screen. "Can we take them on?" Oren shook his head. "Their technology is beyond anything we've encountered. They communicate through coded bursts we can't decipher. The few messages we've intercepted imply that any move against them will be met with overwhelming force." A cold knot formed in Aria's stomach. They were outmatched, and she knew it. The ships she and her team had transformed were formidable against the threats they'd expected: pirates, opportunists, maybe even lesser fleets. But this was something else. The silencers were not here to negotiate or barter. They had come to quash a spark before it became a flame. "What are our options?" Aria asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "We can't just sit here and wait for them to close in on us." Elias' expression remained steely. "We could run, but it would mean abandoning everything we've built, and they'd still hunt us down. No, we have to hide. Stay close to Earth's shadow, use its magnetic field to scramble our signatures." "And then what?" asked Ravi, a young strategist with a knack for seeing through chaos. "Hide forever. They're bound to detect us eventually. They have the numbers and the technology. Sooner or later, they'll find us." Elias turned to him, his face as hard as the steel of the ship. "No one is suggesting we hide forever. We need time to figure out who they are, what they want, and if there's a way to turn this around." "We could try diplomacy," Aria suggested, though she felt the futility of her own words as soon as they left her mouth. "Send a message. Ask for dialogue." "Would you listen to the insects you're about to step on?" Elias countered, his tone harsher than he intended. "If they wanted to talk, they'd have opened a channel by now." Oren nodded. "They see us as a virus, a containment breach. Diplomacy isn't their way." Silence settled over them again, heavy with the weight of decisions to be made. Aria's eyes moved across the faces of her crew. Some were hardened and ready, others fearful, uncertain. She realized this was the real test, not just of their technology but of their unity. Could they hold together in the face of something so much greater than themselves? "Then we need to know our enemy," Aria said finally. "Gather as much data as we can without exposing ourselves. If we're going to survive this, we need to find a way to level the playing field." Elias nodded, his expression softening just a fraction. "Agreed. We gather intel, see if there's a weakness we can exploit." The Resolute and its small fleet of converted ships hugged close to Earth's dark side, their systems dampened to minimal power, running silent. The entire Armada was on edge, waiting, watching. The silencers moved with a slow, deliberate grace, their patterns methodical, like wolves circling a wounded prey. It was clear they were searching, but for now, the concealment tactics were holding. Elias paced the command deck, his eyes never straying from the tactical map. Every muscle in his body felt coiled, ready to spring. Aria, seated at the console, was coordinating with the other ships, her focus razor-sharp. "Any sign they've picked up on us?" Elias asked. "None so far," Aria replied. "But it's only a matter of time. Their scans are too precise, too thorough." As if on cue, a small blip appeared on the screen. One of their decoy drones, designed to mimic a ship's signature, had been spotted. A single silencer vessel broke formation, drifting towards it like a shark drawn to blood in the water. "Hold steady," Elias ordered. "Let them take the bait." The seconds stretched into agonizing minutes as the silencer ship approached the decoy. It paused, seemingly considering, before unleashing a beam of energy that disintegrated the drone in an instant. A murmur of unease rippled through the crew. "They're testing us," Aria said, her voice low. "They're seeing how we'll react. It's psychological warfare." "They're not the only ones who can play that game," Elias replied, his eyes narrowing. "Deploy 2 more decoys, but send them on divergent paths. Let's see how they respond to a wider net." Aria nodded, executing the command. The decoys moved off, their artificial signatures designed to draw attention. The silencer fleet split and 2 ships broke off to investigate. "Good," Elias muttered. "They're curious but cautious. We might have a chance to slip through their net if we play this right." But then, a new signal appeared. A silencer ship, smaller and faster than the others, was moving directly toward the Resolute. A collective breath was held as they watched its approach. "Damn it," Elias hissed. "They're sweeping closer. They must have detected something." "We need to divert them," Aria said, her mind racing. "We have 1 more decoy left. If we can draw them off, we might buy ourselves some time." "Do it," Elias ordered. "But this time, make it look like a fleeing ship. Let's see if they take the bait." Aria deployed the final decoy, programming it to mimic an escape maneuver. It shot off into the darkness, its signal bright and obvious. The silencer ship hesitated, then turned to pursue. Relief swept through the crew, but it was short-lived. Aria's console flared with a new alert. 2 more silencer ships were converging on their position, drawn by the sudden activity. "They're on to us," Elias said through gritted teeth. "We've got to move. Now." "Setting a course for evasive maneuvers," Aria confirmed, her fingers flying over the controls. The Resolute and its fleet broke from their hiding place, engines flaring to life. They darted through the darkness, weaving between the larger silhouettes of derelict ships and space debris that littered Earth's orbital graveyard. The silencers gave chase, their formation tightening, their intent unmistakable. "Prepare for possible engagement," Elias called out, his voice steady even as the tension mounted. "We'll have to fight our way out if it comes to that." The chase was relentless, the silencers' superior speed and technology keeping them close on the heels of the Resolute. Within the ship, nerves frayed. Some crew members muttered among themselves, questioning the wisdom of continuing this mission. Ravi, normally a voice of reason, seemed particularly affected. "This is insane," he whispered to Aria during a brief moment of respite. "We're not equipped to take on an enemy like this. We should find a way to negotiate, or at least surrender." "Surrender?" Aria's voice was incredulous. "You've seen what they do. They're not here to negotiate, Ravi. They're here to silence us." "Maybe they'd let us live if we backed down," Ravi argued, desperation creeping into his tone. "Not everyone wants to die for this ideal, Aria." She fixed him with a hard stare. "We're not here to die, Ravi. We're here to survive, to prove we deserve our place among the stars. But that's not going to happen by groveling." Others overheard, and soon the tension spilled over into a heated debate. Arguments flared between those who believed in the mission and those who feared the consequences of continuing to defy the silencers. For the first time, cracks began to show in the crew's unity. Elias, sensing the growing unrest, stepped forward. "Listen up," he barked, his voice cutting through the noise. "We're in this together. We all knew the risks when we started. If anyone wants out, speak now. But know this, there's no guarantee of mercy from the silencers. They don't want us to exist, period. So, make your choice, but make it knowing the full stakes." A heavy silence fell over the room. One by one, the murmurs of dissent faded. The weight of the decision settled in their minds, and despite their fears, no one chose to abandon ship. "Good," Elias said, nodding. "Then we move forward together. We find a way through this. There's always a way." As the crew returned to their stations, united once more in purpose, if not in certainty, Aria felt a flicker of hope. The path was perilous, the enemy formidable, but the spirit of resistance burned brightly within them, and that, she knew, was something the silencers could never silence. Tension filled the corridors of the Resolute. The air felt heavy, charged with unsaid words and unresolved conflicts. The dim lights flickered, casting long shadows that seemed to echo the silent divisions forming within the crew. In the war room, the heart of the discord beat strongest, where Aria and Elias stood on opposite sides of a table strewn with star maps and tactical projections. Elias stared at the map, his eyes hard, his jaw set. He had been poring over the data for hours, searching for a pattern, a weakness in the silencer's encirclement. His mind was a whirlwind of tactical considerations, but behind that was a simmering frustration, a sense of urgency that gnawed at his every thought. "We can't keep running, Aria," he said, breaking the silence. His voice was strained, like a bowstring pulled too tight. "Every moment we hesitate, they close in further. We need to strike, make them bleed, show them we're not just some frightened animal cowering in the dark." Aria looked up from her console, her eyes meeting his. She had grown tired, but a different kind of tiredness than Elias, a weariness of the soul, of constant conflict, and the ever-present threat of annihilation. "And what then, Elias? What if we strike, provoke them, and they retaliate with force we can't handle? You think one bold move will scare them off? They'll come back with twice the numbers and 3 times the vengeance." "That's a risk I'm willing to take," Elias replied. His voice was steady but edged with steel. "If it means we buy some time, if it means we show them that Earth isn't a sleeping dog to be kicked." Aria's face tightened. "And how many lives will that cost? How many of our people are you willing to sacrifice for a gamble? There's another way we open a line of communication. See if they're willing to talk, negotiate. Not every fight has to be fought with fists." Elias slammed his fist down on the table, rattling the holo map. "Negotiate with what, Aria? Our desperation? Our weakness? You think they'll see us as equals just because we ask nicely?" Silence followed his outburst. The other officers in the room exchanged nervous glances, caught between the two leaders. The tension between Elias and Aria had been building for days, a rift that seemed to deepen with every encounter with the silencers. Now, it felt as if the whole crew were walking on a fault line, unsure of when the ground beneath them would give way. "Enough," Aria said finally, her voice low but firm. "I won't let this turn into a power struggle. We need a decision that takes into account more than just aggression and pride." "Pride?" Elias shot back. "This is about survival, Aria. I won't roll over and die just because you're too scared to fight." Aria's face darkened. She stepped closer, her eyes locked on his. "Don't you dare question my courage, Elias. I've fought as hard as anyone here to bring us this far, but there's a difference between courage and recklessness. You want to drag us into a war we can't win, and I won't let you." The room grew colder, the atmosphere more oppressive. It was not just a disagreement about tactics. It was a clash of fundamental beliefs, of worldviews shaped by different experiences and scars. Elias was a soldier, forged in battles where victory meant survival and retreat was not an option. Aria was a visionary, someone who saw war as a failure of reason, a path that could be diverted through understanding and strategy. "We're not getting anywhere like this," Ravi interjected cautiously, trying to ease the escalating tension. "We need to present this to the Thinkers Guild. Let them weigh in. Maybe there's a middle path we're not seeing." Aria nodded, though her eyes never left Elias's. "Fine. Let the Thinkers decide. We've listened to their counsel before. Maybe they'll help us find a solution that doesn't end in bloodshed." Elias turned away, a growl of frustration escaping his lips. "I'm not holding my breath, but I'll go along with it, for now." Later, Aria walked the dimly lit corridors leading to the Thinker's chamber. The ship hummed with a subdued energy, like the nervous tension of a crowd before a storm. She could feel the eyes of the crew on her as she passed, eyes filled with worry, doubt, and a desperate need for direction. She knew that many sided with Elias, sharing his sentiment that a show of strength was the only language the silencers might understand. But there were others, quieter voices, who feared that any aggressive action could doom them all. As she reached the chamber, Aria was greeted by Oren, his calm presence a stark contrast to the tension that filled the ship. He had always been a steadying force, a quiet sage who spoke less but listened more. "You've come for answers," Oren said softly, a slight smile on his lips. "But you know as well as I do, Aria, that the answers don't come easy." "I'm not looking for easy answers, Oren," she replied, her voice reflecting her exhaustion. "Just the right ones." The chamber of the Thinkers was a stark, almost monastic space, lined with seats that curved around a central table. Here, some of the brightest minds, philosophers, ethicists, and mathematicians gathered to debate, to question, and to seek truth. As Aria took her seat, she looked around at the faces, men and women, old and young, each with their own perspective shaped by a lifetime of thought and experience. The discussions began slowly, with Oren summarizing the situation, the appearance of the silencers, the conflicting opinions within the leadership, and the potential consequences of both action and inaction. Aria listened carefully, waiting for the moment to present her argument. "We are at a crossroads," Oren said finally, his voice gentle but firm. "One path leads to confrontation, the other to negotiation. Both are fraught with risk. The question before us is not just which path to take, but what it means for us, for Earth, and for the future we are trying to build." A mathematician named Leora spoke up, her voice crisp and analytical. "From a purely strategic standpoint, initiating contact carries fewer immediate risks. We can always prepare for combat if negotiations fail, but once we strike, we lose the option of diplomacy. The silencers will view us as hostile, and there will be no turning back. But if we wait too long, they may view our inaction as weakness," countered Samuel, a military historian. "The silencers' doctrine is about control and suppression. Showing strength might be the only way to earn their respect, or at least their caution." Aria leaned forward, sensing her moment. "We can't afford to be so binary in our thinking," she said. "Yes, the silencers are a threat, but they are also an opportunity to learn, to understand how they see the galaxy, and where we fit into that vision. If we strike first, we erase that chance. We're here to prove we're more than just a danger or a nuisance. We're here to stake our claim as a legitimate presence in this galaxy." A murmur of agreement rippled through some of the thinkers, but others remained skeptical. The debate continued, with points and counterpoints flying like blades in the dim light of the chamber. Oren watched carefully, his eyes moving between Aria and the other speakers. He could see the passion in Aria's arguments, the conviction that came from her belief in a higher purpose. But he also saw the merit in Elias's stance, the urgency, the reality of the threat they faced. As much as he valued ideals, he knew that ideals alone wouldn't protect them from the cold, unfeeling calculus of the silencers. When the voices had quieted, he spoke again, his tone measured. "There is wisdom in both positions. We cannot ignore the danger of appearing weak, nor can we dismiss the possibility of understanding. But perhaps the answer lies not in choosing one path over the other, but in preparing for both. We must be ready to speak, and if need be, to fight. We must remain adaptable, resilient, and above all, united." The chamber fell silent, the weight of his words settling in. Aria looked around, seeing the thoughtful expressions on the faces of the thinkers. She knew the debate wasn't over, it never would be. But perhaps they had found, at least for now, a fragile consensus, a way to move forward without tearing themselves apart. Elias, standing in the shadows of the chamber's entrance, had been listening. As the thinkers began to disperse, he stepped into the light, his eyes meeting Aria's. There was no smile, no warmth, but there was a hint of respect, a recognition that despite their differences, they were still on the same side, still fighting for a future worth believing in. "Looks like we're trying it your way, for now," he said, his tone guarded. "For now," Aria replied, nodding. She knew the path ahead was still fractured, still fraught with uncertainty. But for the moment, they had a direction, a fragile unity to hold on to. And in a galaxy filled with silence and shadows, that was a start. The transformation of the Junkyard was nothing short of a miracle or a nightmare, depending on who you asked. What was once a chaotic sprawl of forgotten technology and decaying metal had begun to resemble a vast, interconnected hub of activity. The clamor of welding torches, the hum of generators, and the rhythmic clank of hammers against steel filled the void of space, echoing like a chorus of revival. But under the surface, tension ran like an exposed wire, sparking with every new threat. The Resolute stood at the center of this burgeoning fleet, a beacon of innovation surrounded by a growing armada of newly refitted ships. Vessels that had once been relics now gleamed with new life, their patched hulls reinforced with layers of plating scavenged from the wreckage. It was not just an armada, it was a symbol, a testament to Earth's capacity for reinvention. But with every ship that joined the fleet, with every new alliance formed, the complexities multiplied. The Junkyard was no longer just a collection of broken dreams. It had become a thriving ecosystem of ambition, each faction maneuvering for a foothold, each individual navigating the fine line between collaboration and self-interest. Inside the newly established command center, the atmosphere was one of frenetic activity. Holoscreens projected the latest diagnostics, while engineers and technicians moved in tight, efficient clusters, exchanging rapid-fire instructions. The air was thick with the scent of burned circuits and coolant, the chaotic pulse of a place that had sprung to life in defiance of its surroundings. Elias and Aria stood side by side, eyes locked on the projections of their expanding fleet. The tension between them had settled into a strange kind of rhythm, no longer antagonistic but not entirely trusting. They both knew that this alliance was born out of necessity, not camaraderie. Still, there was a respect there, built on mutual survival. 3 more ships ready for integration, Aria announced, her eyes scanning the data. The Nomad, the Endeavor, and the Star's Whisper. Their systems are patched, weapons operational, and the crews are trained, though still a bit green. Elias nodded, his gaze fixed on the layout. The Nomad's a fast mover. We can use it for scouting runs. The Endeavor has the firepower. It'll be our hammer in a tight spot. The Star's Whisper might be more valuable than it looks. With the right mods, it could serve as a mobile command center. Agreed, Aria said, her tone brisk but considered. But we need to address the security concerns. Another sabotage attempt on the fuel lines this morning. That's the 3rd this week. Elias's expression darkened. I've had enough of this shadow play. Whoever's behind this isn't just a disgruntled engineer, they've got knowledge, access. This goes deep. Agreed, Aria replied. We need to root it out, fast. If someone's selling us out to the Silencers or any other faction that wants us gone, we're vulnerable. They both knew that in a place like this, built on the ruins of what was, paranoia was not just prudent, it was survival. The Thinkers Guild had already warned them of potential infiltrators, operatives with hidden agendas and murky loyalties. Yet, knowing the threat and neutralizing it were 2 very different things. The following day, alarms blared through the hull of the Resolute. Aria sprinted toward the engineering bay, her mind racing with the possibilities. Was it another sabotage attempt, or had the Silencers finally made their move? She pushed through the chaos of the corridors, her breath quickening. When she arrived, she saw a knot of engineers clustered around a smoking console. Ravi, her chief engineer, was barking orders, his face flushed. Sparks flew from an exposed conduit, and the smell of burning plastic filled the air. What happened? Aria demanded, her eyes scanning the scene. Ravi looked up, frustration etched into his features. It's the coolant system. Someone tampered with the regulators. If we hadn't caught it, the whole engine core would have gone critical. Aria's heart pounded in her chest. This wasn't a mere prank or an act of desperation. Whoever did this had intended to cripple them. Elias arrived moments later, his expression unreadable but his eyes cold. He took in the scene, the damaged equipment, the weary faces of the crew. This wasn't an accident, he said grimly. Someone's testing our defenses. They're probing for weaknesses. Aria nodded. We need to tighten security protocols immediately. Full background checks on everyone, no matter how long they've been here. And I want a full investigation into this. Already on it, Elias replied. But we can't just play defense. We need to send a message. Whoever's behind this needs to know we're not going to roll over. Aria agreed, but her mind was already working through the implications. This wasn't just an internal threat. It was a challenge to the very foundation of their fragile alliance. She knew that if they didn't root out the saboteur, they risked more than just the loss of a ship. They risked the collapse of everything they were trying to build. Later, in the war room, Aria and Elias gathered with the core members of their command. including Oren from the Thinkers Guild, Ravi, and several captains from the newly integrated ships. The room was tense, filled with the gravity of recent events. Oren spoke first, his voice calm but serious. The Thinkers have discussed this at length. It's clear that whoever is behind these acts of sabotage is not working alone. There are whispers of alliances forming, factions that see our rise as a threat to their interests. Elias nodded. We can't ignore the possibility that this goes beyond just our ranks. There might be outside influences at play. Someone feeding intel, someone with an agenda. Ravi chimed in. We need to secure our communications, encrypt everything, and establish a network of checks and balances. No one gets full access without clearance from both Command and the Thinkers Guild. Aria looked around the room, gauging the responses. And we need to show strength, not just to our enemies but to ourselves. If we're divided, we're vulnerable. We need to prove that we can handle these threats, internally and externally. Over the next few days, tensions remained high. Security was tightened, but that brought its own challenges. Some crew members chafed under the increased scrutiny, feeling the strain of constant surveillance. Whispers of distrust spread like a virus. Elias and Aria knew that if they pushed too hard, they risked breaking the fragile unity they had managed to forge. One night, after another long day of strategic meetings and tense patrols, Elias found himself in one of the less traveled sections of the ship, where the metal walls were still scarred and rusted from years of neglect. He had come here to think, to clear his mind, but he was not alone. Aria stood in the shadows, her back against the wall, staring out at the endless expanse of stars beyond the viewport. She turned when she heard his footsteps, her expression unreadable. Couldn't sleep either? She asked. Elias shook his head. Too much going on. Too many pieces moving, and not enough control. Aria nodded. Control is an illusion. All we can do is adapt, be ready for whatever comes next. For a moment, they stood in silence, the weight of their responsibilities hanging between them. Then Elias spoke, his voice quieter, more reflective than usual. You know, I never wanted to be a leader, he admitted. Not like this. I thought if I could just fight, just keep pushing forward, things would fall into place. But it's more complicated than that. Aria looked at him, her eyes softer than before. Leadership isn't about control, it's about trust. And that's something we're still learning to build. Elias nodded. Yeah, well, let's hope we learn fast. Because if we don't, this whole thing is going to come crashing down around us. As they stood there, watching the stars and contemplating the uncertain future, they knew that the path ahead would be anything but easy. But they also knew that, for better or worse, they were in this together. And sometimes that was all you could ask for. The Junkyard, now a nerve center of renewed ambition and fragile alliances, braced for another storm. Word had spread quickly across the galaxy. Earth was rising from its slumber. The Armada taking shape in this forgotten corner of space was more than a mere fleet. It was a symbol, a declaration that a so-called backwater planet would no longer be underestimated. The galaxy's response was swift and inevitable. They were coming not as allies, but as predators circling around what they perceived as an unguarded carcass. Officially, they came as diplomats from the Heliox Consortium, the Ashen Worlds, and the Syndicate of New Eden, three of the most powerful factions in the sector. Unofficially, everyone knew what they were, ambassadors of ruin. The preparations for the diplomatic visit began days in advance, and the tension was palpable. The crew, still recovering from the recent sabotage attempts, now had to deal with a new kind of threat, one that could not be solved with guns or shields. Every step, every gesture would be scrutinized, every word dissected for meaning. The Junkyard had become a theater, and the crew were now reluctant actors in a drama that could end in disaster. On the day of the arrival, the Junkyard was a hive of controlled chaos. The main docking bay, hastily cleaned and polished to appear more like a respectable diplomatic port than a salvager's outpost, buzzed with activity. Armed guards lined the entrance, and overhead, ships patrolled in tight formations. As the ambassadors' vessels touched down, The air grew heavy with unspoken tension. Elias watched from a raised platform, flanked by a contingent of officers. His eyes were cold, calculating. He had donned his best uniform, but the lines of wear and distrust etched into his face gave away his true state of mind. Aria stood beside him, her expression more composed but no less wary. She had argued for transparency and good faith in their dealings with these emissaries, but even she knew the dangers. "Remember," Elias said quietly, his voice barely more than a growl. "These people aren't here to negotiate. They're here to divide and conquer. We can't let them see a single crack in our defenses or in our unity." Aria nodded. "We need to be vigilant, but also wise. If we come across too hostile, we play right into their narrative that Earth is a threat needing containment." A trio of figures emerged from the lead ship, draped in robes that shimmered with an almost ethereal sheen, reflecting the dim lights of the docking bay. The Heliox ambassador led the group, her face obscured by a silver veil. To her right walked the Ashen World's envoy, a tall, gaunt figure with pale skin and eyes that gleamed like burning coals. The third, from the Syndicate of New Eden, was an unnervingly calm man with a precise, mechanical gait, a sign of extensive cybernetic enhancement. "Welcome to the Junkyard," Elias said, stepping forward to greet them. His words were simple, stripped of any excess formality. The Junkyard was not a place to hide its nature. It was honest about what it was, both a strength and a calculated risk. The Heliox ambassador inclined her head, her voice smooth and melodic. "Captain, you honor us with your hospitality. We have heard much of your endeavors here, of Earth's rebirth." Elias did not miss the slight pause before rebirth, as if the word were a loaded blade. He forced a smile. "We're just trying to make the best out of what we've got, like any good salvager." The Ashen envoy's eyes flickered, and he spoke in a low, resonant tone. "Indeed, but sometimes what is salvaged is best left in ruins." In the improvised council chamber, a converted cargo hold hastily made to appear dignified, the discussions began. It was a dance of words and subtle glances, of hidden meanings and veiled threats. Aria and Elias sat on one side of the table, with the ambassadors on the other. The Syndicate ambassador spoke first, his voice unnervingly calm. "The galaxy has always respected Earth for its resilience. It's what makes this place unique. But resilience can be misinterpreted as defiance. And defiance, in times such as these, can be quite destabilizing." Aria leaned forward, her eyes steady on his. "Earth has no desire for defiance or war. We simply seek a place among the stars that is rightfully ours. A chance to prove that even from ruin, something extraordinary can emerge." The Heliox ambassador smiled beneath her veil. "A noble sentiment, Lady Velasquez, but nobility is often the prelude to ambition, and ambition, unchecked, can become dangerous." Elias interjected, his tone sharper. "Cut the poetic nonsense. You're not here to discuss our ambition, you're here to see if you can pit us against each other, maybe even buy a few of us off. You don't care about stability. You care about maintaining your monopoly on power." There was a beat of silence, followed by a soft chuckle from the Ashen envoy. Captain, it seems you have a talent for seeing through the veils of diplomacy. But be careful, truth can be a dangerous weapon, often more so than lies." As the conversation continued, Aria sensed the undercurrents flowing beneath every word. The ambassadors probed for weaknesses, asking pointed questions about the fleet's leadership structure, the origins of the new technologies, and the stability of Earth's command. They were like predators, sniffing for blood. Meanwhile, within the Junkyard, tensions simmered. Word of the diplomatic talks spread quickly, and not everyone was convinced that engaging with these emissaries was the right move. Rumors of betrayal began to circulate. Some saw the diplomats as potential allies, others as inevitable enemies, and a few even viewed them as opportunities, bartering chips for personal gain. In the lower decks, a group of engineers huddled together, their voices hushed but intense. "They're just here to manipulate us," said one, his voice trembling with anger. "To pit us against each other, get us to sell out." Another shook her head. But if we push them away, what then? They control trade routes, supply chains. We can't fight the entire galaxy. But we can't bow to them, either, a third argued. We're building something here, something new. We can't just let them dictate our future. These debates mirrored the very struggles at the negotiation table. The ambassador's presence was already working its poison, stoking fears, planting seeds of doubt. In the corridors, the mess halls, and the control rooms, the crew's loyalty was being tested. Back in the council chamber, the conversations took a darker turn. The Syndicate ambassador leaned forward, his eyes cold and calculating. Consider this a friendly warning, Captain Rowe. The galaxy does not take kindly to upstarts. There are powers far greater than you can imagine, and they will not be swayed by mere rhetoric. Elias's eyes narrowed. Is that a threat? The Heliox ambassador interjected smoothly. A caution, perhaps. We would not want to see such potential wasted. The tension in the room was palpable. Aria felt her pulse quicken, sensing the moment's fragility. She knew that Elias was right to be wary, but she also knew they could not afford open hostility, not yet. Earth has learned the value of caution, she said, trying to steer the conversation back to calmer waters. And we hope that in time, others will see that we are not a threat, but an opportunity for collaboration. The Ashen envoy's eyes glittered. Collaboration, yes, but with whom, and to what end? The meeting continued, each side circling the other like hunters unsure whether to strike or retreat. Hours passed, but no ground was truly gained or lost. As the talks wound down, Aria couldn't shake the feeling that they were losing a different kind of battle, one of perception, of influence. The ambassadors had sown their seeds, and it was only a matter of time before they took root. As the ambassadors left, Elias and Aria stood in the dimly lit corridor outside the council chamber. Neither spoke for a long moment, the weight of what had transpired settling over them. They'll be back, Elias finally said, and next time, they won't just be talking. Aria nodded. We have to be ready, but we also need to hold on to what we're building here. We can't let their games destroy us from within. Elias met her gaze, a flicker of something like understanding passing between them. Agreed. But we need to know who's truly with us and who's not, because if it comes down to it, I'd rather face them with half a fleet of loyalists than a full fleet of turncoats. Aria took a deep breath. Then we have our work cut out for us. Building an armada was the easy part. Now comes the hard part, building something that lasts. The Junkyard, once a beacon of rebirth and innovation, now echoed with unrest. Rumors of betrayal and dissatisfaction had been brewing for weeks. The crew, once united in purpose, found themselves fractured by distrust and fear. The arrival of the diplomatic emissaries had ignited a firestorm of internal conflict, and now the flames had reached their zenith. In the shadowed corners of the Junkyard, whispers turned into shouts. A faction, led by a charismatic but disillusioned former officer named Kale, had emerged. He and his followers were convinced that Elias and Aria were leading them down a path to destruction. To them, the promises of a new dawn seemed hollow in the face of mounting pressures and threats. Kale's rhetoric was incendiary, appealing to the fears and frustrations of those who felt sidelined or betrayed. We're being used as pawns in a grand game we don't even understand, he argued in clandestine meetings. They talk of progress and unity while they keep us in the dark. We're nothing but tools to them. The uprising began as a series of small, isolated incidents, disruptions in the engine rooms, unauthorized access to secure areas, and sabotage of critical systems. But it quickly escalated. The faction seized control of key sections of the Junkyard, cutting off communications and supplies. What had been a controlled environment of innovation and ambition had transformed into a battleground. Elias, upon learning of the uprising, knew he had to act decisively. The Junkyard was not just a base, it was a symbol of hope, a testament to humanity's ability to rise from its own ruins. If the uprising succeeded, it would not only dismantle their fleet, but also shatter their morale. He gathered his loyal officers and drafted a plan. The goal was to regain control without causing unnecessary casualties. He knew that confronting the rebels directly would risk inflaming their anger further, but if they waited too long, the rebellion might spread beyond control. Aria, torn between her idealism and the harsh realities of leadership, found herself in a dilemma. She had long preached about the power of redemption and the potential for change. Now, she was faced with a choice that seemed to directly contradict everything she had stood for. Could she justify using force against her own people to preserve the vision she believed in? The confrontation was inevitable. As the Loyalists advanced through the corridors, the air was thick with the smell of fear and determination. The rebels, armed and ready, prepared for the fight they had deemed necessary. The clash was swift and brutal. The corridors that had once echoed with the sounds of progress now resonated with the sounds of violence. Elias and Cale met face to face in a narrow hallway lit by the flickering lights of damaged panels. Cale, his face set in a grim line, held his weapon with a shaky but determined grip. Elias, his own weapon at the ready, regarded him with a mixture of resolve and sorrow. "You don't have to do this, Cale," Elias said, his voice steady despite the turmoil around him. "We can talk. We can find a way to resolve this without more bloodshed." Cale's eyes were fierce. Talk? What good is talk when the leaders ignore the very people they claim to represent? When we're left to fend for ourselves while they scheme in their ivory towers? Elias shook his head. "You're not seeing the bigger picture. We're fighting for something greater than ourselves here. If we destroy everything we've built, we're letting those who want to see us fail win." The standoff between Elias and Cale was more than a physical confrontation. It was a clash of philosophies. Elias's pragmatism versus Cale's idealism. Both were fighting for what they believed was right, but their methods and visions were worlds apart. As the skirmish unfolded, Aria tried to mediate between the warring factions. Her voice, normally filled with hope and inspiration, was now tinged with desperation. "We can't keep tearing each other apart. There's a greater threat out there. We need to unite, not destroy ourselves from within." But her pleas were met with skepticism and anger. Many of the rebels saw her as a figurehead, someone who had failed to protect them from the harsh realities they now faced. For them, the uprising was as much about frustration with her leadership as it was about Elias's. The battle was fierce but short-lived. Elias's forces, driven by a combination of discipline and necessity, managed to subdue the rebellion. Cale was captured, his followers either surrendering or fleeing. The Junkyard fell silent once more, the echoes of conflict replaced by the uneasy quiet of a broken peace. The aftermath of the uprising left scars both physical and emotional. The Junkyard was damaged, its infrastructure strained by the violence. The crew, now faced with the task of rebuilding, had to come to terms with the divisions that had nearly torn them apart. Elias and Aria stood together in the aftermath, their faces marked by exhaustion and sorrow. The victory was hollow. They had preserved their base, but at a tremendous cost. The rebellion had exposed deep rifts within their ranks, and the trust that had once been a foundation of their efforts was now precariously fragile. "Did we do the right thing?" Aria asked quietly, her voice almost lost in the hum of the damaged systems around them. "Was it worth it?" Elias looked at her, his expression somber. "Sometimes the right thing isn't the easy thing. We had to make a choice, and we did. But the real work starts now. We have to heal the wounds, rebuild the trust, and keep moving forward. The fight isn't over, and it's not just about us anymore." As they walked through the damaged corridors, their thoughts turned to the future. The uprising had tested their leadership and their ideals. It had shown them the cost of their vision and the reality of their mission. The path ahead was uncertain, but they knew one thing: they had to face it together if they were to have any chance of success. The uprising had been a harsh reminder of the challenges they faced not just from external threats, but from within. But despite the upheaval, there was still hope. And sometimes, hope was all they had to cling to as they navigated the fractured path ahead. The Junkyard, though still scarred from the recent uprising, had returned to a semblance of normalcy. The corridors, now lined with makeshift repairs and patches, held a sense of quiet resignation. The crew, still grappling with the aftermath of their internal conflict, found themselves in a reflective state of mind. The routine of rebuilding and fortifying their base had taken on a meditative quality. Elias and Aria, each in their own way, sought solace from the turmoil that had recently engulfed them. Their personal quarters, once mere functional spaces, had become sanctuaries for introspection. It was within these walls that they began to confront their pasts, an act of both necessity and catharsis. Elias sat at his desk, a worn photograph resting between his fingers. The image depicted a younger version of himself in uniform, surrounded by comrades whose faces were now distant memories. The photograph was a relic of his past, a stark reminder of the choices that had defined him. His eyes traced the outlines of those he had fought beside, now gone or scattered. He leaned back in his chair, the weight of his past decisions pressing down on him. The scars from his time in battle were not just physical, they were etched deep into his soul. The military campaigns, the conflicts, the losses, they had all shaped him into the man he is today. The idealism of youth had been replaced by the hardened pragmatism of experience. Elias's mind wandered to a specific battle, a confrontation that had marked his turning point. It had been a campaign marked by both strategic brilliance and personal sacrifice. He had made decisions that had saved lives, but also cost others dearly. The burden of those decisions had never fully left him. As he stared at the photograph, he recalled a conversation he had had with a fellow soldier years before. They had discussed their reasons for fighting, their dreams of a better future, and the harsh reality of their present. "You fight for the people you've lost," his friend had said, "but you also fight to make sure their sacrifices mean something." That sentiment had stayed with Elias, even as he left the military and entered the murky world of political strategy. His choices, though made with the best of intentions, had often been guided by a desire to redeem himself for past mistakes. His actions in the junkyard, his decisions regarding the fleet, were all colored by the need to make amends for the ghosts that haunted him. In her quarters, Aria stood before a wall filled with sketches and blueprints. Each drawing represented a piece of her vision, a glimpse into the future she had hoped to create. The sketches were vibrant and hopeful, starkly contrasting with the harsh reality she now faced. She traced her fingers over one particular blueprint, a design for a ship that would have symbolized peace and unity. It had been a project of passion, one she had poured her ideals into. But now, as she looked at it, the design seemed almost naive. The idealism that had driven her to create it was overshadowed by the practicalities and compromises she had been forced to make. Aria thought back to her early days as an engineer, when she had believed that technology alone could change the world. She had worked tirelessly, convinced that her innovations would usher in a new era of prosperity and cooperation. But the harsh realities of their situation had shown her that progress was not just about inventions, it was about the people who wielded them. Her encounters with the Thinkers Guild had only deepened her introspection. Their philosophical debates had challenged her vision, forcing her to confront the limitations of her ideals. They had questioned the ethics of their technological advancements, and in doing so, they had compelled her to examine her own beliefs. She recalled a moment from one of their discussions, a debate about the nature of progress and its costs. Progress, one of the guild members had argued, is not a linear path. It's a series of choices, each with its own set of consequences. That idea had resonated with Aria. Her journey had been marked by choices that had not always aligned with her vision. The idealism of her youth had been tempered by the harsh truths of leadership and the realities of a fractured world. As Elias and Aria grappled with their personal reflections, new intelligence arrived that would change their understanding of the present conflict. The data, decrypted from a series of intercepted transmissions, revealed a startling truth about the silencers. The silencers, it seemed, were not a completely alien force. They had origins that were deeply entwined with Earth's own history. Long before Earth's current state of decay, ancient civilizations had made contact with other species. Some of these interactions had been peaceful, while others had led to conflict. The silencers were one such result of these ancient encounters and evolved, technologically advanced remnant of a long-forgotten conflict. The implications were profound. The silencers were not just an external threat. They were a part of Earth's own unresolved past. This revelation suggested that the conflict they were facing was not just a battle for survival, but a reckoning with history. The decisions made by those long gone had led to the rise of the silencers, and now Earth had to confront the consequences of those ancient choices. Aria and Elias's reflections, though deeply personal, had unwittingly prepared them for this moment. Their struggles with their own pasts had mirrored the broader narrative of humanity's history, a history marked by both ambition and folly. The Junkyard, though still recovering from the recent uprising, had become a crucible of ideas and conflict. The crew had come to accept that their sanctuary of innovation was also a battleground of philosophical and ethical debates. The latest challenge was perhaps the most profound. The Thinkers Guild had proposed a controversial weapon known as the Philosopher's Bomb. In the central chamber of the Junkyard's makeshift council hall, the Thinkers Guild convened. The room, a blend of high-tech displays and old-world intellectualism, buzzed with a murmur of heated discussions. The air was thick with the weight of their decisions. Each member was acutely aware of the gravity of their deliberations. At the center of the debate was the Philosopher's Bomb, a weapon designed to deliver a devastating blow to the silencers. Its potential was remarkable. It could halt their advance and give Earth's fleet a critical advantage. However, its use came with a heavy price. The bomb's detonation would trigger ecological disruptions on a scale not seen before, potentially rendering entire ecosystems uninhabitable. The Guild's head, a distinguished mathematician named Professor Lucian, stood before the assembled thinkers, his demeanor reflecting the seriousness of the matter. "This weapon," he began, "could alter the course of our struggle against the silencers. It could give us the upper hand, a chance to reclaim our destiny. But we must ask ourselves, at what cost?" The chamber fell silent, each member grappling with the implications. The Guild's role had always been to guide the moral compass of the Armada, but this decision was unlike any they had faced before. The question was not just about military strategy. It was about the very essence of their values and the consequences of their actions. Aria, who had once viewed the thinkers as paragons of wisdom, found her faith in their judgment wavering. The idea of using such a weapon seemed antithetical to everything she had worked for. "We're talking about destroying the very world we're trying to save," she argued. "How can we justify causing irreparable harm to ecosystems that sustain life? What kind of victory is this if we become the very force we seek to oppose?" Her voice, usually filled with optimism and conviction, was now tinged with a deep, palpable anxiety. The thinkers, who had once seemed infallible, were now confronted with the same ethical dilemmas that Aria and Elias had been struggling with. Elias, too, was deeply affected. He had always approached challenges with a focus on survival and pragmatism, but the scale of this decision forced him to confront the moral implications of his choices. "We're not just fighting for our survival," he said, his voice steady but strained. "We're fighting for our principles. If we sacrifice our values for victory, what are we really winning?" The debate continued long into the night, with members of the Guild presenting arguments from every angle. The discussions ranged from technical analyses to philosophical inquiries about the nature of justice and the ethics of war. The room became a battleground of ideas, each argument as potent as any weapon. One thinker, Dr. Elena Vargas, a prominent AI ethicist, proposed a counterpoint. "The silencers are not just a threat to us. They represent a broader danger to the balance of power in the galaxy. By neutralizing them, we could prevent even greater harm. The Philosopher's Bomb, while destructive, could be a necessary evil to protect the greater good." This perspective brought a new dimension to the discussion, framing the weapon not merely as a tool of destruction, but as a strategic maneuver with potential long-term benefits. Yet, this argument did little to quell Aria's concerns. She saw the proposal as a profound contradiction to the vision of a better future she had worked so hard to create. The tension in the chamber reached its peak when Professor Lucian called for a vote. The decision would determine the fate of the Philosopher's Bomb and, by extension, the moral direction of their struggle. The outcome would not only affect their immediate survival, but also shape the legacy of their mission. As the vote approached, Aria found herself in a position she had never anticipated, questioning the very principles she had held dear. Her idealism, once a beacon of hope, was now at odds with the harsh realities of their situation. She felt isolated, her vision at odds with the pragmatic approach that Elias represented and that many within the guild supported. Elias, too, faced an internal conflict. His role as a leader had always been to make tough choices, but this was different. The weight of the decision bore heavily on him, knowing that the choice would define their moral stance and influence the future of their cause. As the votes were cast and tallied, the outcome was clear. The majority of the guild supported the use of the philosopher's bomb. The decision was met with a mixture of relief and sorrow. The weapon would be prepared, its potential impact weighing heavily on everyone involved. Aria's heart sank as she absorbed the result. The philosophical debates had given way to a stark reality. Survival had triumphed over ideals. She could see the determination in Elias's eyes, a man driven by the necessity of their situation, but deeply conflicted by the cost of their actions. The aftermath of the decision left both Elias and Aria grappling with their roles and the consequences of their choices. The philosopher's bomb, now a symbol of their strategic approach, would be deployed in an attempt to turn the tide against the silencers. But its deployment came with a heavy burden, one that would test their resolve and challenge their understanding of what it meant to fight for a better future. The Junkyard, once a sprawling haven of hope and innovation, was now shrouded in chaos. The routine hum of machinery and the familiar clamor of voices had been replaced by the harsh sounds of alarms and the frantic scramble of people. The silencers had launched a surprise assault, their advanced technology overwhelming Earth's defenses. The once thriving base was now a battlefield. The attack began with chilling precision. The silencers, known for their stealth and technological superiority, had managed to bypass the Junkyard's sensors, emerging from the darkness like predators closing in on their prey. The initial waves were swift and brutal. Drones and energy blasts tore through the outer defenses, and explosions echoed through the corridors of the Junkyard. Inside the command center, Elias Rowe and Aria Velasquez were thrust into the heart of the crisis. Elias, his face set in grim determination, coordinated the defensive efforts. His orders were sharp and authoritative, reflecting his battle-hardened experience. The crew, once engaged in routine tasks, now moved with urgency, driven by the primal need to survive. Aria, usually the beacon of hope and innovation, found herself grappling with the harsh reality of the situation. Her idealism was challenged as she faced the immediate threat to their lives and the survival of their mission. The philosopher's bomb, still a recent and controversial decision, was now a symbol of their struggle against an enemy that seemed almost insurmountable. As the silencer's assault intensified, Elias made the critical decision to evacuate. The Junkyard, with its vast array of decommissioned ships and scattered technologies, was no longer a viable sanctuary. The evacuation orders were broadcasted through the intercoms, the urgency of the message clear. "Attention all personnel," Elias's voice rang out, strained but resolute. "Prepare for immediate evacuation. All hands report to the designated ships. Leave behind non-essential equipment. We need to move quickly." The crew, many of whom had never imagined their sanctuary would come under such a direct threat, scrambled to follow the orders. The corridors were a chaotic scene of people rushing to gather their belongings, some hastily packing while others sought to secure critical equipment and data. Aria was among those who had to make difficult choices. She rushed through the labs, her mind racing as she assessed what could be salvaged and what had to be left behind. The prototypes and research that represented the culmination of her ideals were now at risk of being lost forever. Her heart ached with the weight of her decisions, knowing that the future of their technology and their mission was hanging in the balance. As the evacuation continued, the intensity of the silencer's attack increased. The crew faced not only the immediate threat of destruction, but also the moral dilemma of who to save and what to sacrifice. The question of priority became a matter of life and death. Elias, now leading a small group through the debris-strewn corridors, encountered a distressing scene. A group of engineers had become trapped, their escape route blocked by fallen debris and active enemy fire. The engineers were essential to their efforts, their skills critical to the operation of the fleet. Yet, saving them would require precious time and resources. Elias made a split-second decision. "We need to get them out," he said, his voice barely audible over the din of explosions. "We can't leave anyone behind." Aria, who had joined him, was torn between the need to act quickly and the moral weight of their choices. "But what about the others?" she asked, her voice filled with desperation. "We can't afford to waste time here. There are other teams that need us." Elias's face was set in a mask of determination. "We're not leaving anyone. If we do, we lose more than just lives. We lose our humanity." The evacuation became a series of harrowing decisions. As Elias and Aria worked to rescue the trapped engineers, they were faced with the grim reality of limited resources and the impossibility of saving everyone. The choice was not just about who to rescue, but also about what they would leave behind. The crew's loyalty and sense of duty were put to the ultimate test. Some made the decision to stay behind, knowing that their sacrifice might allow others to escape. The atmosphere was charged with tension as the crew members struggled with the weight of their choices. Aria's ideals, once focused on creating a better future, were now confronted with the harshness of survival. The reality of their situation forced her to confront the limitations of her vision. She saw firsthand the impact of their choices on individuals, each decision fraught with ethical implications. As the last of the crew boarded the remaining ships, the battle outside raged with increasing ferocity. The Silencers' superior technology and tactics made them formidable opponents. The Junkyard's defenses, once a symbol of resilience, were now overwhelmed by the relentless assault. The ships, hastily prepared for departure, were packed with the remaining personnel and critical equipment. The evacuation was a frantic scramble, with Elias and Aria working to ensure that everyone who could be saved was accounted for. Elias, now on the bridge of one of the ships, oversaw the final stages of the evacuation. His face, marked by exhaustion and determination, reflected the weight of the choices he had made. He knew that their survival depended not only on their immediate actions, but also on their ability to regroup and plan for the future. Aria, standing beside him, could see the strain in his eyes. Their earlier disagreements and differences seemed inconsequential in the face of the larger crisis. The survival of their crew and the future of their mission were now intertwined with their ability to navigate the current challenges. As the last ship broke free from the Junkyard's gravitational pull, the scene was one of both relief and sorrow. The Junkyard, now a smoldering ruin, was left behind as the Armada made its escape. The destruction of their sanctuary was a stark reminder of the cost of their struggle. The crew, now assembled on the ships, looked back at the remains of the Junkyard. The once vibrant hub of innovation and hope was now a battlefield, its future uncertain. The ships, laden with survivors and essential equipment, set course for a new location, a temporary haven where they could regroup and plan their next steps. Elias and Aria, standing together on the bridge, were acutely aware of the challenges ahead. The escape from the Junkyard was not just a physical departure, but a symbolic one. They had left behind not only their base of operations, but also a part of their vision and ideals. As they traveled through the darkness of space, the silence was punctuated only by the occasional transmission and the hum of the ship's engines. The crew, though safe for the moment, were deeply aware of the uncertainties that lay ahead. The survival of their mission and their ideals would depend on their ability to adapt and overcome the obstacles they faced. The remnants of Earth's hope drifted quietly in the black sea of space. The Armada, a motley collection of repurposed ships, was now a testament to humanity's resilience. The scars of the recent exodus were still fresh, the memories of those lost still haunting the air of every vessel. Yet, amidst the grief and uncertainty, there was a renewed sense of purpose. They were no longer just survivors, they were defenders of Earth's potential, its right to exist and thrive against a galaxy that saw them as expendable. Elias stood before a gathering of the Armada's leaders, his face drawn and intense, yet showing a newfound clarity. The bridge of the Resolute served as their meeting place, a once abandoned hulk, now the nerve center of their operations. Monitors flickered with data, and the hum of machines filled the space, underscoring the weight of their decisions. "We cannot run forever," Elias began, his voice steady and deliberate. "The silencers will not relent. They see us as a threat to the stability of their empire, a destabilizing force that must be neutralized. We've tried hiding, we've tried talking, it's clear what they want." Aria stood by his side, her posture upright, yet her eyes betrayed the weariness and strain of the recent battles. She looked around the room, making eye contact with each leader. "But we have something they don't expect," she continued. "We have our unity, our willingness to adapt, and our belief that survival isn't enough. We want to thrive, to make our mark on this galaxy, not just as fighters, but as builders." The council murmured in agreement. Many of them had once doubted this partnership between Elias and Aria. Their ideological clash had seemed like a fault line that would split the Armada in two. But now, the two of them had found a way to balance Elias's pragmatic, military-driven strategies with Aria's more idealistic, inclusive vision. They had become the heart of the resistance. Elias laid out the plan in stark terms. "We need a two-pronged approach. The silencers have a central command ship, a massive vessel known as the Indomitable. It's the brain of their operations. If we can cripple it, we disrupt their entire network." Aria nodded. "But we also know the silencers aren't a monolith. There are factions within them, voices that might be open to a different path. We've intercepted communications that suggest there's dissent among their ranks. They're not all sold on this war of extermination." She pointed to a star map that projected from the table's center, highlighting a sector in a neighboring system. "We send out a small diplomatic team to this neutral ground, a place called Waypoint Echo. It's a risky move, but if we can reach out to their dissenters, we could force the silencers into a corner." The room fell silent as everyone processed the enormity of the plan. It was a gamble, a desperate one that required them to split their forces, to be both warriors and diplomats. The plan balanced on a razor's edge, a final gambit that could either save them or destroy them all. Sergeant Okoye, a veteran soldier with more battles than fingers to count, was the first to speak up. "This is insane," he said, his voice gruff but not without a hint of admiration. "But if we're going down, I'd rather go down swinging and talking than just swinging." Aria smiled, a weary but genuine expression. "That's the spirit. It's not just about the fight, it's about the story we leave behind." There was a renewed energy in the room. Plans were drawn, teams assembled. Elias would lead the main assault on the Indomitable, a frontal attack that would draw the silencers' attention. Meanwhile, Aria would head the diplomatic team to Waypoint Echo, seeking to exploit the fractures within the silencers' ranks. If successful, they could turn the tide or at least buy themselves the time needed for a decisive strike. The hours leading up to the operation were tense. Ships were readied, weapons calibrated, and the crews briefed. On the Resolute, Elias walked the corridors, checking on his crew, offering a word here and a steadying hand there. He had grown into his role, not just a leader, but a symbol. Where there had once been uncertainty, there was now a sense of purpose. His pragmatic approach was still there, but it was tempered by something deeper, a belief that they were fighting for more than just survival. Aria prepared for her own mission with a quiet resolve. She was aware of the risks if the diplomacy failed. They might be captured or worse. She gathered her team in a small, circular room aboard the Halcyon, their fastest vessel, and spoke with a calm authority that belied the fear simmering beneath her exterior. "We go in with open hands, but we're not naive," she told them. "We're looking for allies, but we have to be prepared for anything. The goal is to buy Elias and the others enough time to execute their part of the plan. Every second counts." The crew nodded, their expressions reflecting a mix of hope and dread. They had come to trust her, to believe in her vision of something more than just war, a future where Earth was more than just a backwater, a forgotten world. She represented a different kind of strength, one that didn't just rely on force, but on the power of ideas and connection. The moment of truth arrived. The Armada emerged from the dark reaches of space, the Resolute at its head. Elias's eyes were fixed on the view screen, where the silhouette of the Indomitable loomed like a dark leviathan against the stars. The silencers were already forming up, their sleek ships moving with a predatory grace. "All ships, hold formation," Elias ordered, his voice calm but commanding. "Focus fire on the Indomitable. We have to draw them in, make them commit to this fight." The battle unfolded in a symphony of chaos. The space between the fleets became a storm of energy blasts, missiles, and debris. The Resolute shook with each impact, but Elias remained focused, guiding his crew through the storm with a mixture of calculated risk and sheer willpower. "Target their engines," he barked. "We need to slow them down, make them vulnerable." The crew responded with practiced efficiency. The battle had a rhythm, a violent dance where each maneuver was a calculated move, each shot a step closer to their goal. The silencers fought with their usual precision, but there was a crack in their armor, a subtle delay in their responses, a hint of hesitation. Elias sensed it, the faintest flicker of doubt within their ranks. Meanwhile, at Waypoint Echo, Aria's diplomatic mission was underway. The station was an ancient construct, a relic of a long-forgotten civilization. It had become a neutral ground for negotiations, a place where enemies could talk without fear of immediate destruction. Aria's team disembarked cautiously. They were met by a small delegation from the silencers, their faces hidden behind mirrored visors. The tension was palpable, a silence that spoke of mistrust and the ever-present threat of violence. "I am Aria Velasquez," she began, her voice steady but carrying the weight of desperation. "We're here because we believe there's a way out of this that doesn't end with more death." One of the silencers stepped forward, their leader judging by the way the others flanked them. "You speak of peace, but you come armed," the voice said, distorted by a translator. Aria nodded, acknowledging the irony. "We are prepared for anything, but we're not here to fight. We're here to understand why you fear us so much, why our growth is seen as a threat to your stability." There was a pause, a long moment where it seemed like violence might erupt at any second. But then, the leader removed their visor, revealing a face that looked surprisingly human, tired eyes, lined with age and burdened with too many decisions. "You speak like those who once believed in something greater," the leader said softly. "Perhaps there is more to you than the warmongers we've been told about." Back at the battle, Elias's forces were pushing closer to the Indomitable. Their coordinated strikes were beginning to tell. He could feel the shift in momentum, the sense that they were turning the tide. But the silencers were still formidable. Their counterattacks were relentless. Just then, a transmission came through Aria's voice, urgent and clear. "Elias, I think we found a way to split their command. The dissenters are willing to listen. If we can press the advantage now, we might force a ceasefire." Elias didn't hesitate. "All ships, focus fire on the Indomitable's communication array. Cut off their ability to coordinate." The Armada rallied, their strikes becoming more focused, more determined. The Indomitable began to falter, its once impenetrable defenses cracking under the relentless assault. In the chaos, the silencers' unity began to fracture, and soon the battle was tipping in favor of the Armada. The battle ended with the Indomitable retreating, its fleet in disarray. The gambit had paid off. The combination of military strategy and diplomatic outreach had achieved what seemed impossible. The silencers, now facing internal dissent and external pressure, were forced to consider peace. The dust of battle had finally settled. In the silence that followed, the vast emptiness of space seemed to hold its breath, as if even the stars waited to see what would come next. The remnants of Earth's Armada floated amongst the wreckage of the silencers' fleet, a testament to the hard-won victory that had reshaped the galaxy's future. The silencers, a force that had threatened to snuff out Earth's re-emergence, were now crippled, both militarily and ideologically. They had not been defeated by sheer firepower alone, but by a new philosophy that transcended conflict, a merging of thought and action that no weapon could counter. The Resolute, the flagship of Earth's Armada, was now more than a repurposed battleship. It had become a symbol, one of hope, resilience, and the audacity to challenge a seemingly unchangeable order. It hovered at the center of the newly formed fleet, surrounded by ships that, much like the people within them, had been transformed from discarded relics into vessels of change. Elias stood on the bridge, looking out at the expanse of stars. The weight of what had just transpired still hung heavy on his shoulders, but there was also a sense of relief, a quiet understanding that they had managed to navigate through the darkest of times. His journey, marked by pragmatism and survival, had come full circle. His aggressive tactics, once rooted in skepticism and a hardened view of the world, had evolved into something more nuanced. He had come to realize that strength wasn't just in might, but in the willingness to embrace new possibilities, to bend without breaking. Aria was beside him, her presence a calm counterpoint to his intensity. Her idealism had been tempered by the harsh realities of their struggle, but it had not been extinguished. If anything, it had grown stronger, more focused. She had come to see that ideals were not weakened by compromise, but could be sharpened by it, refined into something more powerful than blind conviction. Together, they had built something neither could have achieved alone, a coalition of ships, minds, and souls that defied the odds. "Look at them," Aria said softly, her gaze sweeping over the fleet. "All these ships, all these people. We've done more than survive. We've given them something to believe in." Elias nodded, a rare smile tugging at his lips. "Aye, we have. But now comes the hard part. The battle is over, but the war, the real one, has just begun." News of the Armada's victory spread quickly across the stars, reaching distant colonies and hidden enclaves. Earth was no longer just a faded memory of a once great civilization. It was now a beacon. And with this newfound status came an influx of attention from allies, rivals, and those who were yet undecided. In a secluded chamber aboard the Halcyon, the Thinkers' Guild convened. The debate had shifted from whether to use a weapon to deter the Silencers to what path Earth should take now that the immediate threat had been neutralized. The Philosopher's Bomb, once a subject of contention, was no longer needed. Instead, they focused on a breakthrough that emerged from their discussions with the dissenting factions of the Silencers, an idea that could reshape the galaxy's power dynamics. This breakthrough was a radical fusion of philosophy and technology, a method to integrate consciousness with machines, creating an unparalleled symbiosis between thought and action. It was more than an enhancement, it was a new way of being. Those who underwent this transformation would retain their individuality, but be linked through a collective network of shared knowledge and empathy. "It's a new dawn," said Asha, one of the leading voices of the Guild, her tone carrying both excitement and caution. "But we must be careful. The power to connect minds and merge ideologies can be liberating or tyrannical. It is the philosophy behind its use that will determine its outcome." Aria, who had been closely aligned with the Thinkers, spoke up. "We have a chance to redefine what it means to lead, to govern, to live. This isn't just about controlling resources or territory. It's about evolving beyond the need for control itself." Elias listened carefully, his skepticism giving way to curiosity. He had been wary of such high-minded ideals, but he couldn't deny the appeal of a future where strength wasn't measured solely by weaponry. "And what's to stop us from becoming the very thing we fought against?" he asked. "The Silencers believed they were stabilizing the galaxy. We could easily fall into the same trap." Asha nodded. "That's why this new era must be guided not just by those with power, but by those with wisdom. It's not about the strongest voice, but the collective voice." The victory over the Silencers had left the Armada with many choices, and with choices came divergent paths. There were those who believed they should press their advantage, use their newfound leverage to consolidate power and prevent any future threats. Others saw this moment as an opportunity to build alliances, to establish a council of worlds that would ensure a balanced and peaceful galaxy. Elias and Aria stood at the crossroads of these decisions. They had led their people to this point, But now they needed to decide what roles they would play in the new order they had helped to create. Elias was drawn to the idea of continuing to lead the Armada. He had seen the strength in their unity, and he believed that they needed a firm hand to guide them through the uncertain times ahead. But he also understood the dangers of clinging too tightly to power. "If we're going to do this right," he said to Aria, "we need to be more than just a fleet. We need to be a symbol of what's possible when people come together, not out of fear, but out of hope." Aria, on the other hand, saw a different path for herself. She had always been driven by a desire to build rather than destroy, to inspire rather than command. The idea of forming a coalition of worlds, a new council where every voice had a say, resonated deeply with her. "We've seen what happens when decisions are made in isolation," she replied. "We need to build a network of trust and cooperation, not just among ourselves, but with those who were once our enemies. That's how we ensure this never happens again." In the days that followed, the Armada became a hub of activity. Envoys from distant worlds arrived, some seeking to ally with this new force of change, others to understand and, perhaps, undermine it. The council chambers aboard the Resolute were filled with heated discussions, debates that spanned days and nights, touching on everything from trade routes and defense pacts to ethical codes and the fundamental rights of sentient beings. Elias and Aria found themselves at the heart of these discussions, their dynamic evolving from one of conflict to one of complementary strength. Where Elias was firm, Aria was flexible. Where Aria sought consensus, Elias demanded clarity. Together, they became the architects of a new philosophy that combined the best of both worlds, a strategy rooted in strength but tempered by empathy. One of the most significant developments was the decision to invite representatives from the Silencers' dissenting factions to join the council. It was a bold move that risked backlash, but it was also a powerful statement. If they could integrate their former enemies, they could show the galaxy that change was possible, that peace wasn't just a dream, but a choice. During one of the council sessions, a former Silencer commander, now a key advocate for reconciliation, stood and addressed the assembly. "We have all been scarred by war and loss," they said, their voice resonating through the hall. "But if we can learn to see each other not as adversaries, but as parts of a greater whole, we can create something that's never been seen in this galaxy, a true and lasting peace." As the days turned into weeks, a fragile but growing sense of unity began to emerge. The Armada became a microcosm of what the galaxy could be, a place where diverse voices were heard, where the powerful and the weak found common ground. The vision of a new era wasn't just talk, it was becoming a reality. Elias and Aria found themselves in a rare moment of quiet on the observation deck of the Resolute. The stars stretched out before them, a vast canvas of infinite possibilities. "We've come a long way," Elias said, his voice softer than usual. "I never thought I'd be standing here, talking about peace and alliances." Aria smiled, her eyes reflecting the distant stars. "And I never thought I'd be working with someone who once saw diplomacy as a waste of time." They both laughed, a sound that was almost foreign after everything they'd been through. It was a moment of levity in a world that had often felt overwhelmingly heavy. "We've learned from each other," Aria continued. "We've changed because we chose to see beyond our own perspectives. That's the real victory here." Elias nodded. "Maybe that's the point of all this. Not just survival, not just winning, but becoming something better together." As they stood side by side, the Armada before them, the future stretched out like the stars. They had fought, they had built, and they had imagined something greater. Now it was time to live it. And in that silent moment, they both knew this was not the end, but the beginning of a new story, a story they would write together, with the galaxy watching, waiting, and hoping.